All right, all right, all right. Cool beans, cool beans. All right, we're doing dragons today, yeah?
Greetings, gamers, and welcome to the 146th live stream from the MisfitGamersStudios. I'm your host, Vortex, and this is D&D Discussions. This is also the very first live stream of 2025, so welcome everybody. Happy New Year. Hope everyone had a great 2024, and I hope you all have a fantastic 2025 ahead of you. Today, we're going to start it off right this year. We're going to start off with a brand new history of, and we're going to go full traditional. We're going to go bare bones and talk about the history of dragons. This is not going to be as crazy as some of our other history ofs, as for the most part, not much has changed, but there have been some, unique aspects that each edition has taken. So we are gonna go over all of that. But before we begin, I did want to make a quick little announcement. Something that I'm going to be trying to do this year, every couple of streams. So heads up for those who've been watching for a while. I'm going to start trying to do a call to action during my live streams, as well as on TikTok for editors. Now, I'm not quite ready to go into massive production and be able to do anything large scale, but we want to basically do is look for people who either know or are interested in editing and are looking to get basically some practice with some actual, streamer content. Since we can't really pay, this will be basically just a, kind of internship, but I do know that there's a lot of people out there that just want to be able to have content to practice on, to work on and build a portfolio with. Eventually, the idea will be once we can monetize the channel, anybody who is still sticking with us as an editor would then be able to be transitioned over to some sort of compensation package. But as of right now, every couple of streams, I'm just going to kind of throw it out there that if you know an editor or are editing or want to get into it and you think you might, just want to start building up some, techniques, or again, like a portfolio, being able to show off what you've done, let us know. Reach out to us on Discord. Link is always in chat throughout the day. But yeah, just let us know, or send anybody our way that because that's kind of the big push this year, is going to actually get some of that really nice edited content on YouTube. And we basically run out of shorts, so I am struggling to basically keep the TikTok channel going right now. So yeah, it's time for us to kind of take that next step and see if we can start working with other people in the community that are also struggling, or at least want to get their first step in. So enough of that. I will just be every now and again be bringing that up, but keep it in mind, keep us in mind if you hear anybody who's interested, and just send them to our Discord. That'd be fantastic. Other than that, I've got nothing else. Had a pretty decent New Year's, Christmas, all of that was good. Got to see family and everything else like that. Wasn't a big gift year, so got a couple cool things that I posted in the Discord. But yeah, other than that, Kage, how was your holidays? How was your time off? Whatever it is that you did.
It was all right. It was all right. Well, shalom, my friends. It's good to be here in 2025. Like, July, I forgot it was 2025 already. It just feels like another day that we have. But no, it was good. I was happy that the majority of my holidays was not really about gifts and stuff, but it was more about spending time with good people. I got to hang out with my lady and a lot of her family. I got to see some of my family, so it was definitely a good deal. It was definitely a good deal. I was really excited that that was my priority over this break time. So it's been good. We got work coming back up here in a little bit for me, so kind of get back into that mode. But outside of that, we vibing, man. We vibing for sure.
Yeah, I started work again this week, and man, after taking 3 weeks off for vacation and just general relaxation, work is kind of a very foreign concept right now.
Yep. Yeah, it's like wild, so wild. I'm like, all right, we'll figure it out. We'll get back into the groove.
Yeah, we'll be fine. I mean, hey, we're here. It's the first Friday of the year. Starting off strong. Didn't quite get to the 50 episode. We had too many things get in the way last year that we didn't quite get to that,
Fair enough.
Sweet spot of the 50
Fair
episode.
enough.
But it's fine. It's fine. We'll recoup it somehow.
We got close,
right?
We can do some extra episodes here and there, so we can make that work.
Yeah, we got some stuff this year. We got some new series. We got a lot of stuff that we want to be practicing with this year. Speaking of which, we have brought back the community stream, so that is now launched and live as of this stream.
Yes.
So for this month, you guys have the opportunity to earn yourself a February community stream. So what are community streams? Basically, what we will do is we add a whole extra stream onto the following month. of whenever y'all earn it. So you guys can spend the channel points, aka XP, in order to get that community stream. We'll do a whole extra episode on a weekend. We'll usually run about 4 to 6 hours, so a little bit longer than our traditional stream. And everything's voted on by the viewers. So the type of episode it's going to be, we have a whole list of episode types and series that we'll do. You vote on that, and then within that, you vote on the topic and kind of direct us a little bit more. And then we have a whole stream based on what all of you want. So if that sounds interesting, go ahead and put some XP towards that community stream. It has been raised. Last year, it was 10K. It is now 15K. So it's a little extra spicy right now, but you guys were getting it within like 1 or 2 streams. So I had to make it a little bit more challenging. Because, if you guys are getting it within the first stream, it's like, what's the point of making it worth it, right? So got to make it a little bit harder. I feel like this would be the perfect episode to mention the new live action How to Train Your Dragon movie. I did see a couple of that.
That's happening?
I'm cautiously excited. I am very cautiously excited because it has the chance. It sounds like a cool idea. But it could also go horribly wrong.
Yeah, a lot of the live action movies have been challenging, to say the least. I don't, out of all the Disney ones that I've seen so far, I don't know which ones I actually like. I don't know if any of them I'm really excited about. So we'll see how it goes.
Like I said, cautiously excited. It's one of the few titles that I would be okay seeing live action. Kage's audio is delayed just a bit.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, you definitely have a lag between video, but that's probably because you're using 2 different devices, one for video, one for audio, so they're not synced.
Oh, that's fair enough.
I'm assuming one's
good camera hooked up to my computer quite yet. Oh, really? 5-6 seconds? Wild.
It's a bit.
I don't think it was this bad last time. We were streaming.
It definitely wasn't, but it has to probably is. I'm trying to think. Is one of them like on Wi-Fi and one of them is hardlined?
No, they're both on Wi-Fi, but gonna see if I could take a look, but. What's that, Hoylepa? Let's see.
Yeah, I don't know what we would be able to do to improve the latency on that.
I was having issues with my microphone earlier, just getting it to connect. Let me see if there's anything.
Technical difficulty is part of the reason why we had to start late too.
Well, yeah, we were trying to get everything squared away as best we could.
Because it seems like the camera is coming in quicker, so that's definitely the one that I think is more up to date. It seems like your audio is lagging behind.
Which is weird because my camera's on my phone and my audio is coming straight through the computer. I'll have to experiment with this. Weirdly enough, this is the same audio that I use for when I do my streams as well. Just different platforms all. So wild.
So you already did. You already put 2,000 to it. There might be a limit on it. I set it up pretty quickly, so there might be a limit.
You did, yeah. I was looking at it too. There's a 2K max that you can put in. I think, is that per stream?
I think it might be per
perhaps?
stream.
Or can you come in here during the off time and submit stuff tomorrow?
I think it's
when we're
per
not
day.
streaming?
Technically, I think it's per
Interesting.
day. So yeah, technically you can do it when we're offline. Still have 7K. I thought you were gonna save that up for the AMAs.
7K.
I thought you were yeah. Thought you were interested in doing those AMAs.
I love those AMAs.
All right. Well, I gotta go get another water before I start going over all of this. So I will leave them in your hands while I go get a water, and then I guess we'll just begin, and we'll just have to do our best to work around the slight delay in audio. All right, I'll be right back.
I'll see if I can't do any troubleshooting with these guys. Get myself squared away a little bit better. Interesting. I don't need to redeem AMA since y'all answer regard. I mean, yes, we do our best to answer regardless of redeeming it, but a lot of the times when things are like off topic, or you want to ask about the Cineverse, you want to ask about High Point or something like that, the AMAs are really, really good for that. But let me know if my I'm playing around with some settings right now. Let me know if my my voice delay gets any better compared to my video. We'll see. One of my players is going to run the next campaign, and it's a Star Wars based. I have a character that's basically Ahsoka, but a bounty hunter instead of a Jedi. Interesting. I'm very curious where they've got their, because I know they have different like PHBs for different versions of D&D. I'm curious where they got their Star Wars PHB, because I've heard that that's out there, but I have not seen it. SW5E PHB. If you can share that, perhaps I would be highly interested in taking a gander, because that would be super cool. Redeeming it. I can send it in the Discord. Oh, that would be beautiful. That would be absolutely beautiful. I would love that. All right.
Doesn't seem like there's any improvement, but that's all right. We can still move forward with this. I need to move this. I need to see chat still.
We'll make it work.
I need to see chat. I need to see that. That one.
Thank you, Soul. That's beautiful.
All right, so I guess I was gonna change the camera, and I'm like, I guess I don't have anything to show you guys. It's just gonna be chit chatting. So I guess we're in the perfect situation. Excuse me. All right. So the history of dragons. What do you know about the history of dragons, Kage?
History of dragons? Not a whole lot. What do I know about dragons? I know that there's definitely some lore that basically says that there are a lot of, there's like the version of dragons you remember from like Game of Thrones and stuff, where they're just dragons, but then there's also the type of dragons that, you know, they are sentient beings. Like if you've ever watched like what is the Critical Role, and their first campaign was dealing with a lot of dragons, and like the dragons will talk back to you, and they have human forms, and they can transform and things like that. There's all kinds of very interesting, what I would consider lore behind what dragons are and what they can do, and how pivotal their hordes are to the type of dragon that they are, and like what they can do and things of that nature. So it's very interesting when you really get down into it, and I'm interested to see where it started and where we ended up, for sure.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing about this is like dragons have been one of those things where there hasn't been a lot of alterations. It's just been one of those addition upon addition upon addition, right? They just keep adding to it instead of fundamentally changing.
Mm.
1 second. Of course, my notes don't. I gotta find a better way to like do notes. Like they make like the notes I take make sense.
I've been working on that a little bit.
It's just it's the way that I organize them. It makes sense while I'm doing the research, and then I come in to read it, and I'm like, this could have looked better. But at the time, I'm not thinking about, I'm not looking at it from that point of view. I'm just trying to get the information, and then days go by, and I'm like, oh yeah, there's that thing I got to do.
Right. That would be nice. Hey, maybe you can add that to the program you're writing when you talk about cleaning up some of the other information. Maybe you could use a cleanup for some of your notes. Note taking be damned. That's for sure. Especially as a player. Shoot, even as a DM, note taking be damned for sure.
That's why I use my players.
Yep.
Sorry, chat. Just reorganizing notes so I can
actually. Come from the Bible. That's very interesting.
What does? What?
I'm reading Hoylepa's one of Hoylepa's statements. They said that Western dragons come from the Bible, as Maria, the Holy Mother, pregnant Satan came down in form of a dragon. Interesting. See, this is probably why a lot of people think that D&D is so directly related with like satanic cults and things of that nature, is probably because of some sort of mythology along this lines.
Nah, it was more of just a smear campaign. Wait, what? Why is this not working? That's my second edition notes. Okay, so these are first edition notes. Those are second edition notes.
Homebrew creator, it be damned. The challenge I'm doing with Hecate, my notes, is segmented in about 4 to 5 different categories. Yeah. So is this the challenge where you guys are going to submit to us 2 like side-by-side homebrew things? Or is this like your own personal challenge that you have between each other? Because I think a homebrew challenge just sounds fun, just in general. Okay. Very good. Well, I'm still looking forward to what you guys end up submitting. So that's gonna be very fun. But regardless, wild.
Yeah, I'm really curious what this whole thing is gonna be.
I am very much looking forward to what you guys end up submitting, but I also know that I have at least 18 pages of notes for my samurai class, and it is Lord Jesus. Like, I know what I want to do with it, but it's like, all right, now I need to parse out all of these pieces. Now I need to make sure they all go from one side to the other, and I feel like I'm doing a lot more than just creating the samurai class. We had talked a while ago, Vortex, about kind of creating a new standard for class progression, and the class that I'm making, I want to feel like it works well with a class progression. So it's definitely something I want to implement as a part of that. I don't know. I'm there's a lot that's going on with it, so it won't take me for. Here's my goal. All right, Kage's goal is to have this class finished, like polished, at least ready for round one submission by, I want to say, by summer, but I feel like that's ambitious. So by the end of the year is what I want to say. So
Okay.
we'll see where
It
we
depends on
actually
how
get
much,
it.
you get to work on it. Maybe, we'll get to work on it, on stream or something.
Yeah, maybe I'll spend some of my some of my development streams working on it. But yeah, I think it'll work out. I think it'll work out.
All right. So I think I got all my notes figured out here now that I can actually read through them and they're actually segmented properly and not just a giant wall of text. All right. So starting as we always do, going back to, I mean, especially with dragons, I mean, it's in the name itself. So we have to go all the way back to OD&D. We have to go back to the original Dungeons and Dragons, 1974, because that's where it basically all began. Obviously, they debuted, right with the first box set, but it wasn't nearly what we have today. The dragons of old were more or less what you had mentioned previously, where they were some of the greatest beasts to live, right? Some of the best apex predators out there. Some of the, the highest risk, high reward type of adventure. But in the end, they were still just one among the many of types of monsters you could face. So while they became important and synonymous with the game, and they were, the expectations of them, they weren't as critical to, I guess you would say, the cosmos, right? They weren't as critical to the essence of everything D&D. They were just among many of the different types of monsters you could face, typically some of the best and highest rewarded. And specifically, they were only actually early on broken into two types. In very much traditional OD&D fashion, it was more alignment based. So you had your base chromatic or evil dragons, and you had metallic or good dragons. That was basically how they originally set them out. And each had their own, obviously, accompanying breath weapon and particular traits that they would, they would have, what environment they like, what their, how they would attack, and what kind of horde they would have. So originally, while they were, this fantastical beast that you could go after, more often than not, outside of a lore, outside of like the raw lore that you would get from the box sets, or without it being a campaign cornerstone, as in, you're a dragon just burnt down, the village and you have to go defeat it, something like that. For the most part, beyond those two aspects, dragons really were initially just used as that high risk, high reward dungeon delve. More times than not, if they weren't directly part of the campaign or introduced in the box set as part of the lore of the setting that you were playing in, they were really just influential in making sure that that mid to high tier gameplay had loot basically worth it. And it was one of the easier ways for DMs to add in a challenge that also had a understandable amount of wealth behind it, right? Because a lot of the times, you can only have so many treasure chests in a dungeon, right? You can only have so many things drop items. But a dragon horde, that's, that's something that any party will want to really adventure and push themselves for.
You can find in there is absolutely wild. So that can be a place where you can put stuff where you might not expect it, right?
Yes.
And still have it be something like we always talking about, making it make sense, like having the lore behind it actually makes sense.
And this is back also to when they were just pure powerhouses. I mean, all of their primary abilities relied on their breath weapon and their sheer size. Like those were the two primary aspects. I mean, they could fly. Some of them could fly, some of them, some of them didn't. But, its breath weapon and just the fact that it was a sheer tank was kind of the biggest, danger, right? Nowadays, we think of dragons having, magic resistance and legendary actions and, like high intelligence, but at this stage it was simply just um, some of the strongest creatures you could find, just roaming, about the place. So originally, and this is kind of something that we're going to see throughout the entirety of each of the editions, is the foundational lore behind dragons, because it pretty much always stays consistent. And this makes most sense because D&D lore hasn't really changed. They've just added, new lore, but they haven't really like gone back and retconned anything. But it's interesting that dragons have always been, due to the fundamental nature of just dragons and dungeons, they've always really been portrayed as primordial beings, usually tied to some, like, on the mortal scale, they're usually tied to some sort of like archetype, right? Like, the idea of them being good and evil and representing, various aspects of human nature, right? They've always been looked at and looked up to as these, older than time itself, these things that were around before everything and will be around after everything. And it's really interesting because that
Right.
aspect of the lore hasn't really changed. Now it has accelerated, like it has gone to the stage of godhood and deity like, and even further beyond, just primordial, right? We've had different types of dragons get added to that pantheon, but dragons have always been revered as the oldest and the strongest, essentially, of all of the living type creatures. So I always found that like fascinating, that dragons have always just been considered the first, like essentially like the first, right?
I mean, it is in the name of the game, Dungeons and Dragons.
Mm-hmm.
So I totally get that. I totally get that.
And then, yeah, we didn't really get a whole lot of in-depth lore really, really early on. Mainly that they were just, ancient, powerful, and had their own zones of control. They were all territorial, and to enter, their territory would basically be a death sentence for most. So that's kind of where it kind of just like stood early on. Early on, I think we first got, like, in terms of like named dragons, ones that you would recognize. I think the earliest, like the oldest of the dragons, I think were named, the ones that were named in OD&D were Tiamat and Bahamut. I think those were the two that were first named in any of the box sets. That was the hardest part of me to find this information, is which ones were named properly first. But they were typically, you had Bahamut of, the Platinum Dragon for good, Tiamat, the five-headed evil dragon, and those were the first, inklings, the first like seeds planted for what will become like the divine and godlike gods we see in later editions. But these two were kind of like established as the reigning champions of either side, right? Of the chromatic and the metallics. They were the two most ancient, the two most powerful, essentially godlike in the dragon's, mindset. So imagine what that meant to a mortal, right? When everything in creation reveres dragons, and then dragons have something they revere, what is that to a mortal?
Yeah, very scary.
And then speaking of that, speaking of in terms of like what a dragon would revere, yes, they're very territorial. Yes, they kind of stick with their own kind. But originally, their hierarchy was practically entirely age-based. That's why I meant like the idea that Bahamut and Tiamat being the oldest of their lineages, right? Essentially being considered the very first to ever be created, and they begat all other dragons below them with it, within the thing. So yeah, it was completely age-based. The older the dragon, the more powerful, and the more that they would be able to have. So ancient dragons versus adult dragons versus young dragons was kind of the hierarchy that they had. And that was also just how they were, built as well. The older the dragon, typically it's like the older the dragon got, the higher the CR, in a way that you could put it, right? So they got more hit points, more damage. Breath weapons, increased. Their saving throws got better as they aged. So that was just kind of the general, mechanical progression, but it also makes sense in lore that the longer they live, the more that they can sustain. Um, in terms of
Okay.
the differences between chromatic and metallic, other than good and evil, obviously the chromatic evil dragons were more like domineering. Theirs was all more about, you know, exacting their power, and gaining more power, and kind of like on a Sith mindset. It's all about, you know, getting stronger or taking over those that are below you. Whereas on the good side with the metallic dragons, it was much less about the hierarchy and it was much more about the cooperation, the society. I mean, again, this wasn't like the most intelligent that we've seen dragons, but the idea that the metallic dragons would work together and overlap in territories, whereas you go to the chromatic side and there are no overlaps. Every dragon owns their zone and there is no impedance. Um,
Would you say that there is any connection to a dragon's power and like the size of their horde, or is that more of just like a trophy for them to just
it's
say, "Hey,
that
here's
has
what I've
also
collected over
changed.
the years"?
That's also changed significantly. So we will go
Okay.
over how the hordes have changed, but there has been no hard and fast rules with hordes specifically, which is kind of interesting. It's definitely more of the trope than it is the rule, I would say. But essentially, it's hand in hand.
Okay.
The older and the stronger, the more they would have been able to accumulate, right? And the more that they can guard. Because obviously, if there's a weaker dragon that was able to hoard a lot, a stronger dragon would come in and muscle out that dragon for their horde. So yes, in one respect, a horde was a representation of what that dragon did with its age and power and muscle. But on the other hand, there are various references to, I think in later editions, to the horde also being crucial to the dragon's sustainability. So it's not so much a one-to-one representation of strength. It's not like, you know, a weak dragon can just suddenly go sit on a large horde and be, you know, a million times stronger. But there has been over time suggestions that the horde has a sustaining, rejuvenating type of power for the dragon. So we'll definitely get into a little bit more of the particulars at the end of each of the editions. And then most dragons were considered loners, even on both the metallic and the chromatic side. So often you wouldn't find them fighting together. You wouldn't really find more than one in a single horde. And the overall concept of dragon society, outside of the cooperative nature of the metallic dragons, wasn't really an idea. Like they didn't have, you know, communal zones. They didn't have common areas, right? They didn't have like, hey, this oasis, we all just share it, right? It's just more of a, oh, hey, you metallic dragon, you're flying through my area just to, you know, finish off that hunt. I don't care, you know, versus a metallic or the chromatic side would be like, oh, that's now mine and now you're both mine because you came into my territory and I want to eat now. So I'm going to eat both of you. That would be more or less what their society was. And we start off with actually only 5 of each. So it was actually really, really simple back in OD&D. You had your chromatic dragons. Again, these are your evil dragons. So you had red, your traditional red dragon with fire breath weapon. You had your blue dragons with lightning, green dragons with poison or acid. It was kind of, I think, dependent upon the DM and the region. Certain regions would lean more poison, others more acid. And it was also kind of not really, those two types weren't necessarily like strictly in the rule books. So it was kind of whatever you want to flavor it as, because we don't specifically have poison damage and acid damage. They're kind of one and the same.
Oh, that's right.
So it was very much a, do you look at it as
we do a history of damage types already?
We haven't, no. That would be a good one to write down.
Interesting. Okay.
We also have and then we have black dragon, which is also acid. That was the actual acid. So green was typically poison unless it didn't really make sense, and then you defaulted to acid. And then white was cold. So cold breath weapon, kind of just like freezing breath.
Right.
Gut,
white as snow.
Yeah. And then your metallic dragons, you have your gold dragon, which was fire. I think also later in one of the supplementals was also optioned as chlorine gas. So kind of similar to the poison option. silver was cold, bronze was lightning, copper was acid, and brass was fire. So we actually had more fire than anything else, which I find interesting. But yeah, acid and fire seem to be like the most common of all, of all the types, which doesn't necessarily not work lore wise in terms of their saliva or whatever being acidic could definitely makes a whole lot more sense. And then fire being a pretty common one. I think that's just more of the most traditional that you would think of. So I think that's the easiest to just accept that fire happened more than once. And then the earliest stage of OD&D in terms of dragon hordes, pretty much again in the original context, it served as that high reward for the high risk. It was the concept of a horde was primarily geared towards rewarding the players for taking on this endeavor and succeeding. So and in OD&D in first edition, gold was tied to leveling up. So, it was really typically measured just in gold pieces because that was the most important thing for adventures, right? It was less important to get paintings and magical items and weapons and all of this other fancy stuff and vases and all of this, right? For them, coins equal XP. So hordes were typically just geared towards being massive piles of gold that the party could then turn into experience and get that massive reward for taking that endeavor.
That's right.
And again, this was
easily equal experience. Yeah.
And this was a valuable thing for DMs and campaigns alike, because at certain points this could bump people 3 levels, right? 3 to 5 levels you could get. So depending upon how your party was going about the game, how much you wanted to accelerate it, these were great ways to kind of push them into that next zone very easily. Especially if you didn't have, if you couldn't spam it, right? If it wasn't one of those things that you could just, do over and over and over, right? You give it 1, you give it 2 in a campaign, and these will be those like big milestones where they're going to actually like get to really level up. So yeah, so that was primarily it for OD&D. Very basic, very straightforward. They were the best of the best monsters that you could go after. They had the best reward. You usually would level up immediately after taking down a dragon due to the sheer amount of gold. And you'd also typically get that bragging rights, both in and out of game. You finally took down a dragon as a party, but in game you get that your party now can walk around, everybody knowing that you took down that dragon, right? So you can now use that as in-game lore.
Was there ever any specific, we'll say, titles that you could receive in D&D, like Dragon Slayer or something to that effect? Like
nothing based off the book sets. I think Dragonlance introduced some things like that, but nothing officially in any of the core rule books that were like titles in terms of this would get you that. I think a lot of that was up to the DMs, and a lot of DMs would. You would definitely be able to gain notoriety from it, but there wasn't like a table where it was like, here's achievements you can do, and in game, here's what could be done about it. But honestly, I kind of want to add that to the ADMG now. Like that would be kind of cool to basically set up our own, basically really like in-game achievements. They come with a title and like certain ways that you can make sure that it gets like done properly. Like, hey, have this type of NPC follow, like nearby so they can like confirm it. But like basically have like a little series of like ways for people to introduce that into their game, and then have like titles, and those titles have like knock-on effects. Like you get a free feat, or you just give them a certain feat, right? Or expertise in something. I love that. That's so dope. Like we could do a lot. There's a lot you could do with that.
No. It's so cool because it's not just like titles as in like, oh, you're a knight, oh, you're a lord, oh, you're a king, like scale wise, but it's also like the breadth. Okay, you killed dragons, you killed a hydra, you killed like whatever the case may be, or just like the fact that you saved a town. You might not become a lord because you saved a town, but you're a town champion or something to that
Yeah,
effect. And each
I
and every
like
one of
that.
them could have very different effects, almost like your background features, kind of similar to that. They're not always going to be like huge. You might get discounts at stores. You might get information from people where you wouldn't otherwise. But just, I think that's a really, really interesting idea and a
I
really
like
cool
this.
thing to like add on.
No, I definitely want to add that. I got to step away for real quick, but yes, let's go on with that idea. So, yeah, entertain them real quick, and then we'll move on to first edition.
Okay. Um, but yeah, so far this is developing fairly well. I'm really excited that I did not realize the depth in which dragons actually existed back in the day. Hey, good. I almost said good morning. It's not good morning right now. It's evening, night, whatever. Being on vacation has got me all screwy. All right, I don't know what day it is. I don't know what time it is. It just be what it be. Whatever, it's fine. But welcome, Hecate. Um, we out here talking about dragons right now. But no, I think that's a phenomenal idea. It's so cool to think that you can have these titles, these things that like bring you into like this is another aspect of who I am, of what I am. And so I don't know. I really enjoy that idea. So I'm excited to see what we can eventually do with that.
Yeah, yeah, we'll man, that's going to be another big thing is to have a draft of that done by the end of the year. I would love to have a first draft.
Mm.
All right, so first edition. Let's move on. So OD&D gave us the bare bones of dragons, right? We get types, we got some basic
I'm gonna be
powers,
back right
and we got a
quick 'cause I
purpose.
realize I don't have any water.
So we have types, we have some abilities, we have a purpose, right? Giving adventurers something worth going after and giving them a big reward for it. But as time goes by and as the editions expanded, little did dragons change, but so much got added onto. And that's what I really, really enjoy about how a lot of these things progress is sometimes we see a lot of rule changes and sometimes we see a lot of aspects get completely remodeled. But with dragons, a lot of it really just becomes more finalized in terms of lore and just becomes more varied in terms of mechanics. So with AD&D first edition, we did not get any additions to the traditional chromatic or metallic dragons. We kept we kept the main 5 of each. The lore and abilities did get expanded upon, so we got a little bit more of the history of the split off. Why what each one is, why it takes refuge in certain environments, how they got their breath weapons. Really, it just kind of goes into a lot more detail and gives us a better idea of why there are dragons, right? Before we figured out there were dragons and where you could find them. But now we got a little bit more about the why they're there. One thing that we also got though from first edition is they actually added 2 new dragon types. Most of these were added, or these 2 were added in separate modules, not necessarily the core rule books, but in settings and modules.
Friendship.
Oh, hello.
Friendship.
For the
Again.
resubscribe 6 months in a row. Wow. Thank you, Hecate. Appreciate that so much. That just completely derailed where I was. Thank you. But we did get 2 more added in some supplementals and some modules. So the first one that AD&D added was the Shadow Dragon. This is obviously like darkness, shadow powers, and then we also got pseudo dragons. These were tiny, like miniature sized, like almost like cat or small dog sized dragons with very limited intelligence. And these were introduced for the purpose of mechanical or magical companions. So you got these tiny little like wannabe dragons that you would actually be able to have as a companion. But the Shadow Dragon was the main type of dragon that was added onto after the fact or in this edition. We did get a lot more detail in their lore and their abilities. They were now classified by age category. So before we mentioned that, it was just about just who was the oldest, but now AD&D finally solidified the young, adult, and ancient categories. Gave a better understanding of how the stat block. Before it was just an understanding that they just got stronger, had more health. Now we actually had stat blocks. Now we actually had an understanding of what does what do all young dragons, have in common? What do all of the adult dragons have in common? What do all of the ancient dragons actually have in common other than just they're more powerful than the previous? And these things were, damage, hit points, magical powers, and their abilities, things of that sort. In between first and second edition, you got supplementals like Dragonlance, which also went way further into lore, history. I mean, Dragonlance was basically all about figuring out if you loved dragons, you played Dragonlance just to figure out what was everything before this moment, right? What happened to dragons up until this point. And we also got a different change though. Is previously their breath weapons were pretty straightforward in terms of their damage type and their damage output. Now in AD&D, we got a small change where breath weapons were now tied to hit dice. So breath weapons got tied to hit dice, and they were also now able to use magic, things like polymorph, charm, and of course now they officially had flight. It was always assumed that they could fly, but now officially in the stat block they had flight. But AD&D was the first addition to really suggest that these were more than just ancient creatures, but ancient magical creatures that had intelligence enough to be able to cast spells. So first edition was the first time that we got the idea behind dragons taking human form. That's hence the polymorph, and being able to essentially enact their ideas upon the mortal world, or at least in ways that they would be able to communicate with normal mortal people without freaking them out and showing up as a dragon and having them try to kill them.
That this is what at this point is when they started to be considered as sentient beings, whereas before they could be considered just monsters.
Essentially, yeah. Now we're starting to look at them as much more of a like, just because they're ancient, they're not just ancient and old, they're actually ancient and wise kind of concept. So this is where we're going to start really getting the idea that there's more than, they just exist. And again, right before you showed up, they did add shadow dragons and pseudo dragons. Shadow dragons having their own select sort of powers, and pseudo dragons being small, unintelligent magical companions that parties were able to obtain and travel around.
But still considered a part of like the dragon hierarchy.
Yeah, they're still technically dragons. They're just the lowest form of them, essentially. And AD&D was the first edition also to give us the official god/deity categorization for Bahamut and Tiamat. So now we actually see them as godlike figures.
Got it.
Officially rule the chromatic and metallic, respectfully. And the idea of draconic politics and morality, especially directed by these two heads of each of the houses, you can call it, was really solidified. So the idea of following like a dogma of sense within their belief system, instead of it just being that some were okay with each other and others were all for one. Now it was more of this idea that the beliefs behind Tiamat and Bahamut would influence the general day-to-day life of these dragons.
So this might be my lack of knowledge. And I remember at the beginning you talked about, chromatic being evil, metallic being good, but what is the biggest categorization between these two different types of dragons? It's like, when you say metallic, what does that just an identifier that's saying, hey, these dragons are evil? When you say chromatic, is that just these ones are, or is there something else about them that actually is somewhat metallic and somewhat chromatic in their
So
nature?
for the most part, the terminology was more or less based around the color types, right? So a red dragon, a black dragon, a green dragon, these are chromatic colors, right? Like just the idea of a chromatic color set. Very basic colors. These are your primary
Okay.
colors. Metallic, it was a gold dragon, it was a silver dragon. These are dragons that have that color, have a shine. Typically, you would depict them as having like the shine, not necessarily a polish, but the shine of a gold, right? Like you would actually see it glow and not just be yellow. So yes, there is a distinction. When you say chromatic, you're thinking of like the leathery skin or the scales of a dragon, depending on how you envision that. But imagine more of your metallics are definitely going to officially have like official scales, right? They're going to have like the shininess. They're going to actually represent in some way the essence of what they are. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what they're made out of. It's just what they represent. It's just how they look. And of course, those all come in different shades and variations, right? There could be 100 different types of gold dragons in terms of quality, but you could also just say that that's exactly it, right? It could be a sense of quality, purebredness. It could be a sense of the dirtier the dragon, the more they go out and do stuff, right? Veteran dragons who have fought in many wars, maybe they're dirty and unpolished and not clean, and they look like tarnished. But then you have the politician dragons, right, who have never seen an ounce of hard work in their life. They might be super polished and look like they're wearing medals. So that was mostly left up for the DM. But yes, chromatic and metallic was a visual difference, as well as it would be able to identify what its abilities were, and it would typically where you would find it. All right, and then for AD&D First Edition, the hierarchy was still based primarily to the age and size category, and again, the older you got, the bigger the size category. But typically, it was still based on the older the better. There was very, no official instances where a younger dragon was, more authoritative than higher dragons, unless you're talking about like sense of property, right? Like expertise or something like that. But traditionally, it was still based around the older you got, the stronger you got, and the stronger you were, the higher up the food chain. Again, I wanted to go back to Dragonlance, although it's not in like official like edition. This was because it was kind of in between. It was very foundational to a lot of the changes that we see in dragons today, specifically not just the dragon lore, but the relationship between dragons and mortals. Because before it was just a plot point, a monster to go attack, and then AD&D try to make it more about the lore and more about that. They're more complex. They're more than just roaming deer, in another field, right? But Dragonlance really came and brought us what I think the first layers of what everyone assumes dragons are in D&D, right? These amazing, ancient, powerful, intelligent creatures that you could reason with, that you could talk to, that you could go attack, but maybe they would outsmart you, or maybe they would give you a chance or make a deal with you. Dragonlance really set the stage for what do mortals mean to dragons, what do dragons mean to mortals, and how has that relationship evolved over time. So like I said, it's one of my least favorite modules, simply because of how railroady it can be. It's one of those ones where there are certain NPCs where the game can't progress without them. Like, just absolutely, this NPC will live regardless of how reasonable it sounds. This NPC has to live, kind of concept, right? Like, you have to do things in a certain order in order for it to progress.
If you got some murder hobo PCs that want to go do something and kill them off, it's pretty much just not going to work.
It's one of those kind of games where it's very difficult to not follow it, because it's really narrative and story. It's story based, which is fine. It's lore based, and that's great for teaching, but it's very difficult for me to play because it doesn't allow me to really just play my character. It just forces me to just, walk down the hall and play the video game. um
Stuff.
and then in terms of the hierarchy, we've already kind of talked about that. Again, we got these more age divisions. We got these categories, but it's still based purely on age. We didn't really get any major expansion to the hierarchy in terms of the godhood. So we still have just Bahamut and Tiamat as their primaries. And we also got one of the first introductions in terms of internal hierarchies. AD&D was the first to establish that within the chromatics, red dragons were typically seen as the top of the chromatic dragons due to both physical power and just their arrogance and their attitude. They were just some of the most aggressive. I mean, kind of goes hand in hand with the concept of fire, right? And red. But yeah, this was official that red dragons were typically seen as the top of the chromatic dragons just because of their aggression and raw power. And while the metallic dragons always tended to work together, the gold dragons were typically seen as the leaders, or as those that would go and settle the disputes between the metallic dragons. So we finally got kind of an internal hierarchy, not just from the god tier, but even within the society. Each had their own that they would go to. And first edition also expanded a little bit on what hordes mean. We got a little bit more detail in hordes. They kind of started expanding beyond just straight gold coin, because even though it was still really tied, XP and gold were still really tied in first edition. We were trying to get more narration out of it, so they did want to expand a little bit more. And they gave better guidelines instead of just saying, hey, set an amount of XP you want and equate that to gold. It really gave better guidelines on how to convert aspects to gems. It introduced the idea of art, magical items, trinkets, the everyday thing you think of, like when you think of like Alibaba's, or Aladdin's, Cave of Wonders concept, right? Just not just coins stacked, but just gold and silver and gems. And this was the first time they finally started saying, hey, why are what is the likelihood that a dragon only pickpockets people for gold? You know what I mean? Like the idea of how do you even get it there, right? Like they have to be able to transport it. There's some fascinating. I should have added more about that, but I didn't actually specifically add a lot because there isn't a lot of core rule books. But there's fascinating ideas of how dragons transport and collect their hoard.
I was gonna ask about that. I really was curious. Like, say if a dragon wants to go take over another dragon's hoard, like, are they like flapping all of that gold, all of that hoard, all the way back to their original spot? Or are they like
sometimes? I've heard a lot of different theories.
Magic.
They do have magic. I have heard a couple different theories. One of my favorites is that they actually have like a special stomach for it, where they can actually just where it doesn't dissolve it. I've heard another one where they actually have like
I like that idea.
I've heard other lore where their stomach is specifically designed not to break down certain things. So like they could eat an adventurer and it will only break down the organic parts, and then they would just regurgitate all of the the gear essentially, and it would just be pristine. So the gold in their pockets would just come out. Whatever rings they had would just so there's been a couple different ideas on how that would work. I don't remember anything from the core rule books that specifically stated how it was supposed to be done, but it's there's a lot of ways to ponder how a dragon would do that. And also what AD&D, speaking about more of the horde too, with first edition, each dragon type was now associated with a specific treasure preference, reflecting different like personalities that you would see. So for instance, gold dragons would typically, like in a gold dragon horde, it would be typically things like fine art and relics, while red dragons would just want gemstones. Like they just want shiny rocks. And I found that to be one of my favorite
shiny rocks.
Right? And I found that to be one of my favorite changes to dragons is not just have them all hoarders, right? Not just indiscriminate, I want wealth. The idea that each one has a preference, right? Like, and you can, you could call that whatever you want and you could have it mix and match. But the idea that if you're going after a red dragon, not just from a player point of view, but also just from a lore point of view, knowing what the more likely items in that hoard are going to be is kind of not only interesting from a player point of view in terms of like trying to decide what you want to do and whether it's worth it, but from a lore aspect, it makes it so much more enriching to think like, what draws that, right? Like what draws them away. And you could think like, well, with the dread dragon, gold melts. Gold's very, very soft, but shiny rocks don't melt. Shiny rocks just get shinier the hotter they get, right? Like, so it's like you could say like, or maybe they like it warm. So right before they go to bed, what if they could breathe fire on all of their shiny rocks and make them warm for when they go to sleep, right? Like, so maybe that's why they want them, right? Whereas, maybe the gold or, maybe whatever dragon wants like just pure gold, just actual like monstrous piles of gold. Maybe they're a dragon that likes weighted blankets in a sense. So maybe they like to get underneath the gold and have it weigh them down in order for them to sleep. This is the kind of thing that I really like. And what we talk about during homebrew review is when you give enough lore for me to use, but also enough to be consistent. I can make every red dragon like gemstones, but I can decide why. What makes the most sense for why a red dragon would like gemstones? To me, because they can warm them up and they'll stay warm all night while they sleep. That to me sounds cool, but if they did that to gold, the gold would melt, So the idea behind giving reasons why each one has a preference, gold dragons, right? Maybe because they're so shiny, maybe they like art because it isn't shiny. Maybe they like relics because they're not made of gold. Maybe most relics, are made of finer materials, but maybe a gold dragon's so tired of seeing bright light that it just collects shit that doesn't shine and it can actually appreciate. You know what I mean? Like, there's fascinating ways to make your own decisions on the lore while still sticking to the lore, like as written.
Yeah, I totally feel that.
And while the hordes did not impart any specific powers just yet, this is one of the other aspects where in OD&D hordes were just kind of synonymous with dragons, as a purpose of, hey, you did it, here's your reward. Now we have an actual symbology. Other than the fact that, lore-wise, it would make sense the older, the more tough a dragon is, the bigger their horde would be. Now it became part of the lore that a horde was more than just a side project or a hobby. It was actually a symbol. It was what dragons actually had a sense of pride in their hordes. So it was a status. It was, the bigger your horde, the more mortals you took on, the more things you did, kind of like an adventurer collecting stronger weapons, right? A level 20 adventurer with no magical weapons versus a level 10 adventurer with a +5 sword. Who do you think ran into more shit? You know what I mean? Like, just because he's level 20 does not mean that he saw the same life that level 10 did. If he has a +5 shield, invisible armor, and he has a blessing from a god, like, bro, what the fuck did you do? You know what I mean? Like that's that mindset.
Yeah.
Because if you get to level 20 without a magical weapon, like, you could do it. It probably took you forever and you didn't do anything of note, but you could do it. You know what I'm saying? But I'm way more afraid of the dude walking around with magical weapons, because I'm like, bro, you got that from someone. So I like that. I like the idea that these hordes were a sense of pride.
You did some kind of craziness.
Yeah, or you took someone out that used to have that, right?
Yeah.
And that's the idea. So it's like, so the idea that it wasn't just... What was that?
I was going to say that's one of the things I really like about what a lot of Cosmic's homebrew is. A lot of it comes baked into his lore. Like, he's got a whole weapon set coming from his BBEG. He's got a lot of stuff that comes from his dragon deity that these guys are going to protect. Like, there's all kinds of things that you can see are directly related to the lore of the world, and it's like, you don't know what these people had to go through to get that. type deal.
Mhm.
So I very much agree with that.
And that's why, so with this one, again, it didn't necessarily equate to power, but for instance, if you were able to get your eyes on the horde before the dragon, there was a common idea that the larger the horde, the harder that dragon's going to be to fight. So, if you got information on a horde that's bigger than the king's, vault, that's probably not a dragon you want to take on at level 5. You know what I mean? But if you have a dragon that could, a man could retire off of, if someone says, oh, there's a dragon in his horde, a man could retire off of that. That doesn't sound that much. But if you're like, oh, you'd become a sultan, you'd become the emperor of the continent with that dragon's horde, you'd be like, oh, I'm going to wait till I'm level 15 for that one. So I do like that. I do like that it gives DMs more to use while still making it consistent. All right, but of course, all things have to, all things have to continue. And of course, now we finally get to my favorite second edition, 1989. We did not get any additional chromatic or metallic dragons in second edition. However, we did get more expanded lore, social structures, as well as history. So the difference between what first edition did to OD&D and what second edition did to first edition is basically we got the idea of this monster. First edition says there's more to it than that. They're not just monsters. They're integral to everything. And then second edition said, hold my beer, let me show you how much. And they went that extra mile and said, it's not just that they're integral to everything. It's like they went that one step and said, you know how they were primordial? You know how they're ancient? You know how they're here before everything? Nothing would be here without them, is essentially that stance that second edition took. They went that extra mile and said, y'all just owe everything to dragons. So just be happy that they're still around. Be happy that they ever were around.
You exist.
And their social structure got way more. In OD&D, they were just monsters. First edition, they had basic understandings, minimal politics, some hierarchy. Second edition is where you start to see things like they have councils, they have groups, they have representatives, they have liaisons, they have, the black dragons have a special type of dragon that goes and talks to the gold dragons because that's, that's the one that they approved. That kind of level of hierarchy where while they still individually control their own territories, the larger dragon society still operates as a collective. We also got introduced because we had the chromatic evil dragons, we had the metallic good dragons, and in lovely second edition, forget the word I was looking for. But in the tradition of second edition, they had to break it even and give us the neutral dragons, the gem dragons. These also...
Oh, that's what neutral looks like.
Yes, gem dragons became the neutral dragons, which came with psionic abilities. And we all know that I love me some second edition psionics. So we were introduced... We were introduced to 5 new dragons: the Amethyst Dragon, the Emerald Dragon, the Sapphire Dragon, the Topaz Dragon, and the Crystal Dragon. We also got Planar Dragons introduced, and this is where we got a refined version of the Shadow Dragon from first edition. While they tried to expand upon that, this became now more of a Planar Dragon. This is now from the... Other than just being another type of dragon with a different ability, second edition, again, said, hold my beer, let me show you how integral it is. In first edition, we just got the Shadow Dragon. Like, it was just a dragon with a new set of abilities. Second edition said, nah, that thing belongs in the Shadow Plane. That thing belongs from the Shadow Plane. Let's talk about dragons being from everywhere. And this is where we're going to start getting this idea that wherever you go, there's some sort of a dragon, like, tied to that location. So I do like that, the Shadow Dragon coming from with planar ties coming from the Shadow Plane really started to show that they were trying to show that dragons didn't just exist in the Prime Material Plane, but that's how expansive, that's how, intertwined they are with all of creation, is that there's a type coming from everywhere. We
Interesting.
also got the introduction
Okay.
of the Dracolich, an undead dragon. Dragons animated by necromancy.
Wild.
The Dracolich. Yeah, because of course, second edition just can't leave it alone. They're just like, oh no, we're doing it. We're going all out. And of course, we have a new companion dragon. Before we had the pseudo dragons, but now we get fairy dragons. So before pseudo dragons were more like small dog, like cat-like, fox-like animals, like magical creatures that were semi-dragon-like. Fairy dragons were basically tiny dragons. Just take a dragon, put it in the palm of your hand, fairy dragon. Like an official, not pseudo dragon, not a wannabe, just a, there you go, miniature dragon. And I love that. That's what we all wanted. We all wanted a little mini handheld dragon.
And hell yeah. That's so wild. That is so wild. I love that.
And the thing that everybody wanted from the very beginning finally happened in second edition. In 1994, the Council of Worms was introduced. And it was a brand new type of campaign that completely upended Dragons as we know it, because it was the first time, it was the first campaign where players were dragons. Second edition was the first to introduce us to an entire campaign where you were dragons. Dragons.
When we're saying this, are we talking about legit dragons?
Yeah, like Council of Worms opened up a whole.
Dragons.
Yeah, no, this was not Dragonborn. So this was a whole brand new expansion into the concept of dragons. Gave us, like, we've gotten lore before, but now imagine being able to play that lore, being able to be intertwined with it. The different uses that this basically made for second edition, and what it did to expand lore as a whole. Dragons can now be allies. It opened up the concept that they weren't just a campaign plot point. They were now full-on potential intelligent allies that had their own motives and agendas. They were player characters. Players could actually create a dragon and play it. And their treasure hoards became more integral to their motivations. So again, not just a sign of status, not just I like certain types of treasure, but the type of treasure that they needed would directly change what they went after, right? So only certain dragons would really be tackling more like think about gold dragons, right? If they wanted artwork, where are they going to get artwork from? Are they going to go to a tiny little village by the lake? Are they going to go into the mountains where there's a monastery? Fuck no. They're going to go and tackle a fucking kingdom, right? They want to go straight for wealth. But a gold or a red dragon, I mean, with gems, it might be hard for a red dragon to get at gems inside of a vault, inside of a kingdom. But guess what? Mining towns, small little mining towns, what are they picking out of the ground? Fucking gems. So I like this idea that it was encouraged that don't just throw your party at anything. Understand why would the dragon? I mean, I'm hoping that it also, like, if I don't know, I know chat probably doesn't see it, but I'm hoping you do. Like, I'm hoping this kind of represents and shows people, as we always do these history of, and we, especially when we go through second edition, I hope it's a representation of why I think and DM the way I do, right? Because this is the D&D that I came up with. The idea that it wasn't purely hard, fast rules. It was these ideas of, here's a little bit of information. What can you do with it, right? Here's what horde, or here's the type of horde a red dragon likes. And we encourage you to make it make sense why and who they're going to go after to get that horde. And to me as a DM, adding that bit of lore to say, hey, you're at a mining town. Let me roll a d20 or let me roll, percentiles to see if there's a chance for a dragon attack. And if there is, the most ideal dragon would be a red dragon, because this is a gem mine, right? Versus a platinum mine, which might get a silver dragon's attention. Yeah, that's the kind of shit that it's like, I read this stuff and I'm like, no wonder I game and DM the way I do, right? Like, looking at how second edition is, it's no wonder why and how it influenced me as much as it really has.
No, I really, really like that. I think that there's so much to be said for again, just the idea of understanding why. I feel like too few people actually ask themselves that question, is like, why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we here? Why are we saying what we're saying? Why are we running into what we're running
We're still
into?
here.
I think that it's something that just it gets forgotten. It gets Nobody pays attention to it because for the most part, theoretically, it doesn't matter. It's just
It's
we're
the
just
what,
playing a
not the
game. We want
why.
to hit some stuff and kill some stuff, and I'm like, I feel like there can be so much more, especially when you look at the game like, as we've talked about before, a collaborative storytelling effort where it's like, I want a good story. I want to enjoy the why that we are here. But, a lot of the times it becomes more video game-esque. And how many times have you been in a video game that you really enjoy and you're just skipping all the dialogue, right? You're not actually caring about what's going on, what the story is, what's happening here, right? I'm guilty of it myself, but again, because a lot of the reason why you're there is to enjoy the gameplay, not the lore. When I am in a D&D game, for me, the lore is very much in tune with the gameplay itself. So, like, knowing what's
Agreed.
going on. Now, truly, sometimes I will tune out as a player to some of the lore, but that's specifically because my character is also tuning out of that lore,
Exactly. Not
right? My
every piece of
character
lore is
doesn't care about
beneficial.
what you're talking about. Yeah, and so it's like, if I am a barbarian that just wants to go smash some things, and you guys are all talking about some book that's got a bunch of different languages in it, I'm gonna be sitting there having a freaking nap, twiddling my thumbs, and not care about what's going on. And so, truly, when it matters down the road, and we're trying to remember, oh, we're at this puzzle, and this book said this thing, my character's not gonna even try. He's not
Yeah.
gonna speak up. He's not gonna be like, oh, wasn't it that one thing we read in a book 5 sessions? No, he's not gonna say that
Because
because he
he
wasn't.
wasn't involved in it, and it doesn't make sense for him to be involved. And no, and I 100% agree. This is one of the things that we talk about with like metagaming, the idea that your character knows more than you, but sometimes it's that situation of just because the player knows doesn't necessarily mean the character would know, right? And I appreciate like that kind of gameplay, and that's what I like to do,
Yeah.
right? I like to make sure that if my character has a chance to know it, then I'm fine. But if there's no chance in hell my character would have paid attention to it, I'm just because I as a player remember, I'm not going to benefit off of that, you know. So there's all different types of ways to play. There was a TikTok I saw too recently where a DM was trying to really try to like show off like they were very very big on metagaming. Like they are 100% like full on okay with metagaming. Like players basically reminding other players what they can do. It was a conversation about reading each other's character sheets. Um,
Sheets? Interesting.
yeah, it was
I
like it
remember
was
that
a
was a
whole thing
big deal
where
when I first started gaming with you. Is like, you don't look at somebody else's character
well,
sheet.
and exactly, and that's my biggest thing because for me it's all about every player, every character has their own agenda, right? And so at that point it's whatever they don't want the other players to know is up to them, and I'm okay with it, if the players all agree. But it was like a stitch where the first person was like, how do you guys feel about this? Like, do you guys do it? Do you guys not do it? And then the stitch came in where he was like, no, 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 me and my players, everyone at my table looks at each other's character sheets, everyone knows everything. And then he started making examples of like, if someone forgets that they have an ability and someone's like, hey, don't you know you have this spell, or didn't you have this weapon, or didn't you pick this up, or didn't you like, and he's like, I love it, I'm fine with that, that's totally cool, collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. He was all very positive about it, and I'm not saying that that's wrong, but he also ended it with, but keep in mind that everyone at my table is close friends and family, right? Like it is a game that we get together to be cooperative and for everyone to have the most amount of fun. And I think, he didn't say it, but I think he was trying to insight that it's like, it's more about the fun than it is the challenge, which I get, totally respect that. But in the same on the same coin, that's the exact opposite of High Point. In terms of High Point, it's more about, to be honest, it's more about the challenge than it is about the fun. Not everything in High Point is going to be fun, but it is. Like, things can be fun when they're not fun. And at the same time, it's like, I don't mind if character players like share, but the idea that you're going to remind them, it's like, you got to remember, like, it's the same argument of what you can do in 6 seconds. 6 seconds is a long time, but it's also not a long fucking time when 20 things are happening around you, right? So it's that balance that I find that is interesting, right? There's no wrong way to do it, but it is interesting how some DMs are like, I want my players to just shout it out. And I'm just like, let them figure it out.
And that to a certain degree, right? There are limits when it comes to that. Like the DM saying it doesn't matter all the time, it's acceptable. I have a little bit of problems with that. Other DMs saying never do it. I have a little bit of problem with that. My biggest thing is there's a group that I play in, and one of our players is, I wouldn't say he's new to D&D, but getting a certain grasp of certain aspects of what's going on. Like there'll be so many times where he just doesn't understand certain things that he can do. He thought using his what do you call it? When you're a cleric and you use your, we just were talking about this, channel divinity. He thought that was
Yep.
using a spell slot, so he was not using it because he thought that it would cost him a spell slot, or he was.
And that's, yeah,
There
that's
was
one of
just
those things where
certain
if someone were to be
aspects of
like,
the game where it's like, I want to be able to help these guys understand this is how you can use your character, what you've built, what you've created to the best of your ability. But there comes a point in time where you've mentioned in our games where it's like at a certain point in time you have to take responsibility for that. You have to take responsibility for understanding how your character works, for understanding what you can and can't do. And too often people are, I will say there are times where people just try and shirk that responsibility and just try and let everybody else basically play the game for them, and they're
yeah,
just kind of along for the ride. And
or
that
just min max it,
is
always trying to
pretty
get
much where
the,
I draw the line.
exactly. Cause my biggest thing is like, look, if I like, sometimes I know that there's a better way to do it and I can just tell my players not thinking it all the way through. And I'm okay helping them out or being like, are you sure? Don't you have no other spells? Like I'll lead them there. And those are other times when like, another player could pipe in and I'm okay with it. Right. Like, but it's that time when everybody at the table is absolutely trying to guarantee that every other person at the table is getting the maximum output of every single turn. And I'm like, I get that from a gaming mindset, but again, this is a story narrative. This isn't a video game. And for me, I play this game because I want the story, to lead the game, right? And sometimes that means not being perfect every single time, right? It's kind of like having a video game where you can save scum or checkpoint reload or pause and just always guarantee like, oh, I killed this enemy, pause, change my armor real quick to take out this enemy, pause, change my weapon because this enemy was immune to that damage, pause. And it's like, that's not what I want D&D to be.
In those Zelda games, they do that all the time where there's like, oh, I'm in the middle of the game, let me freeze real quick, let me switch my weapon to this, oh, let me switch my ammo to this, let me and they do
And
all
it's
these
like
cheesy, yeah, it's definitely that.
And I do that shit in video games, but that's why I play video games. But when it comes to D&D, there are times where I'm just like, look,
Exactly.
it doesn't become fun narratively speaking if you like, I'm not saying that it's not fun if you always win, right? It's not, I would never say that it's always fun if my players always like that. That's why it's fun, because they're continuing the story. I'd hate it if they never passed. But when they're always getting through it with the most optimal chances and the most optimal way, and it's like it's never really a challenge because 5 people are playing one character at a time, that's when it becomes less interesting for me, because I'm like, then why am I even having a part, like why am I even telling a story? Why don't I just give you a challenge and then all of you tell me if you decided that you could fix it or not? You know what I mean? Like it's just one of those, I don't feel as connected if the story doesn't mean anything to your character's reaction, right? Like again, when a character's like, nope, I'd be too surprised and I'd be too mad, I'm not even gonna, like, nope, I can't do that thing that I want to do right now because my character's too mad. That's what I want, right? But a lot of times you get those characters who are like, no, you should do this. Oh, but remember, you could do this, and someone else will come in and be like, but if you do this first, you'll get the best out of it. And it's like, that's technically and mechanically all true, but would that character have thought about that in the moment? Like, has the character ever done that before? Does the character even know they can do that, right? Those are those things where it's like, if the player learns it on their own or in the moment, it makes sense for the character to have come up with that. It's more of a growth because now they're like, oh, I just learned something about myself. But when somebody else just kind of tells them, here's the best way to use your character, what are they learning? What are they? How are they growing as that character?
More likely to remember it later if they figured it out in game rather than just getting told it. It's way more likely for them to actually get better at the thing if they've actually are the ones that are like, oh, I get it now. Oh, I see it now. Oh, that's how that works. Now it's so much more a part of them, and hopefully again if they're all there for the same reason, it helps so freaking much. So
It also helps with creativity. Like if they came up with it on their own, they're more likely to come up with something else they can do with it. Whereas if someone told them how to use it, they would just repeat the exact same thing as often as possible.
Agreed.
All right, so going back to second edition, because that was kind of a wild little tangent. But part of what Forgotten Realms did, one of my favorite, I don't know, what do you call Forgotten Realms at this point? It's not even it's not an edition. It's not like a module or a supplement. It's just whatever you call that. But
it's kind of a supplement. Yeah.
I guess supplement's probably the best term for it. But we also got, not just with the Dracoliches, but along with the Dracoliches came the Dragonomicon.
The what?
The Dragonomicon. Just like the Necronomicon, but it's the Dragonomicon.
Dragonomicon.
Yeah. So Forgotten Realms officially introduced that, which is how we got the That's how we got the Dracoliches, the undead dragons, and basically just kept, again, all they kept doing was like, first edition was like, hey, dragons are a lot more than monsters, and there's a lot more lore here, guys, and they're more integral. And again, second edition was like, hold my beer, I got this. And they just were like, there's dead ones, there's undead ones, there's godlike ones, there's a whole new type of race called gem ones, there's fucking, there's a whole new book. The Dragonomicon was just basically a whole extra expansion of the concept of dragons. They put it into the planar dragon, right? Like, again, second edition is just, will always have a place in my heart because as complicated and as weird as some of the things were, it was the spirit of what they were trying to do for D&D at the time. That's, third edition may have some of the best mechanics. Second edition, I think, had the most heart and the most spirit of true D&D. If I'm gonna be honest, that's what it is. Second edition nailed the heart and spirit of D&D. Third and 3.5 nailed the mechanics. And if you could blend those back together, if you could bring back how you played second edition, but use those refined third edition rules, kind of like I do in High Point, it just becomes like one of the absolute best versions of this game, in my opinion, in my humble. But second edition also expanded more spell casting abilities. So we got more spells than just your charm, because before it was basically just charm, polymorph, and like shield and one or two others. Now we're gonna get more of like dragons are now spell casters. Like we truly get a spell casting ability. So it's not just here's 2 or 3 spells they can have. Now they are full on magic users. They are just intelligent enough to be, they can learn magic, they can cast magic, they have their own magic, but now they can also learn magic. We also got innate resistances. So this is where they first implemented the idea that dragons are innately magical and have just certain resistances, both to magical and non-magical things.
They didn't have resistance even to their own element before this?
Nope. Now, granted, a lot of DMs would flavor it. A lot of DMs would flavor it that way.
Dragon with fire.
Technically. Now, again, most DMs would flavor it that it was less effective. This was the first core rulebook that said now we have actual resistance. And of course, they kept the age-based scaling of power. So it's still purely the older you get, the stronger you get. Which, again, I kind of like that, right? Like, it's not about what they do. It's just kind of built into them, right? But if you think about it as a dragon, the only way to live long is to be powerful. Like, no one's just going to let you sit there. And even if they did, even if they let you sit there and live,
going to come for you.
Yeah, and even if you could just live that long, what good are you? If you're that strong, that powerful, that much HP, but you've never fought in your life, how hard are you going to be to defeat by an adventurer or another dragon, right? So being a dragon of age meant you've probably earned being alive that long. So yeah, we got the gem dragons, the planar dragons. So now second edition again, we're still holding their beer, because now we've gotten the idea that it's not just about Bahamut and Tiamat now. It's not just about they are the most ancient, strongest, and godlike. Dragons were officially really steeped into the actual cosmology of the entire D&D pantheon with second edition. Their role in the official D&D creation myth, their relationships with gods, and like gods coming after dragons kind of concept. Like, this is what second edition did before. Not even Dragonlance gave us all of this. Dragonlance gave us a deeper inside look between the interplay. Second edition said, this is how it all happened. This is the oldest of the old dragons. This is where they came from. This is how, again, like, this is like the concept of the creation myth. Like, the fact that second edition was like, you're only here because of dragons. Not just that they were here before you, you're only here because of them. That's really what we got with this extra lore. But I love the fact that, again, it was the interplay and relationship with the gods that we know in Forgotten Realms now. Those relationships were also really expanded upon. So we got basically every corridor of lore and every aspect of history kind of has it like dragon influence now. So again, it's just more of that. You can't get away from it. Dungeons and Dragons is truly Dungeons with, and Dragons, right? It's not just some creature that you can come across. Like, you can't but be a part of the dragon.
You can't escape it.
Hierarchy. Yeah. The Council of Warden supplement, as mentioned before, that was the one that allowed you to roleplay as dragons, diving into the culture, politics, the rivalries, the intricacies of hordes and all of that. You can actually explore the societies. So they actually had a whole built out thing where, again, it wasn't just you flying around protecting your territory, right? Like, this was actual diplomatic, political intrigue gameplay where, again, this is probably one of the aspects of second edition that has influenced High Point in a lot of ways, and not just from dragons, but just the way that they implemented a different type of political system, a different way to interact with a society as a whole. The expansion of just having dragonkind as something to interact with, it didn't work the same way as mortals did. So it expanded, for me as a DM, it expanded those ideas of, well, what else can I do that with, right? Like, what other things don't operate like human hierarchy? And that's, I think, just again the why second edition embodies that heart and spirit so much of the narrative-based gameplay, because it just showed you things don't have to work the way you expect them to for them to work. You know what I mean?
Right. No, I definitely appreciate that.
And then, of course, in terms of the Council of Worms, the Draconic Society and hierarchies were still mostly age-based. We did have a little bit of a cleaner delegation. Instead of it just being that red dragons were the strongest, chromatics and gold were the strongest of the metallics, now we started to get more into the concept of clans. So it's not just the color, but then you actually had families and clans and subset groups. Typically, each of those were, ruled by the strongest of theirs within the pack. So again, it wasn't always a red dragon leading chromatic dragons, right? There may be a sect where a blue dragon is leading them, and another sect where a red dragon is leading, and another sect where, a topaz dragon is leading. So they really started to develop, again, more of this bigger division, kind of like what you would expect to see, in a human society. But they really kind of just wanted to detail out that dragons were no longer these isolated individuals outside their horde. They were this complex, ever-evolving society with many, many layers of understanding and misunderstanding, I guess you could say.
Okay.
And then again, typically the higher up you go, it always ended up at an ancient dragon. So typically whatever clan would always have like an ancient dragon leading the entire clan, and then giant regions would all have, the oldest ancient dragon, that would be, of whatever clan, of the oldest clan, that clan would rule like the whole region. So there was always an ancient dragon behind everything. And then of course that went all the way up until you got to the godlike ones. And then we also got a small expansion of the horde again. Outside of, we got a little bit more of the why they hoard it. This was starting to be more of the sustainability, the concept of it wasn't just this idea of showmanship, but it was how you set yourself out in the society. So again, not directly tied to their power, but now that we have so much of this intrigue and politicalness, hordes definitely meant something to power, not necessarily just magical, as well as some of the supplements in second edition were the ones that hinted at not necessarily like it's the source of their power, but it helps sustain their power. But again, nothing officially in the core rule book.
So you could weaken a dragon by stealing from their horde.
Yeah, and it wasn't so much a physical weakness as it was more of a psychological, a social weakness, right? But at the end of the day, it was meant to be representative of if they lost their horde, it would definitely unsettle them quite a bit.
Oh, I would think that because I have heard, rumors is the wrong word, but I've heard tale of dragons being connected to their hordes in a way where if you stole from a dragon's horde, they might be able to like find you or find the piece of their horde that was stolen from them. Now, I don't know if that was ever like official lore or anything like that, or if it was just kind of some old wives' tales type deal. But
so a lot of that was more based on the most. It was basically based on the most powerful of their horde aspects. So you steal a couple coins, that could be flavored that they could find it, due to their magical essence. But typically when it came to dragons, especially with like second edition and how they expanded upon it, they also encouraged things like having like major pop points, not just for leveling up, but having very, very important, powerful artifacts being guarded by certain, like certain dragons are actually assigned to guard it. So as part of their horde, so they put it in their horde, and the horde's there to kind of like, distract or just be there. But in those cases, typically that's when you would have it to where if they were assigned it, or if it was one of those like uber powerful and they were like, I'm going to be the protector, that's typically when you would see those kind of like magical abilities where they could hone in on missing horde, or they would have in some way imbued it with a way for them to track it. So nothing in the core rulebook as their whole horde, but you typically saw that with like the most highest end of the artifacts, like the most powerful things that they were actually guarding instead of just accumulating.
Makes a little bit of sense. So they have some because it would make more sense like if this item is going to be like a part of this dragon's horde, like maybe the longer it's a part of the horde, the more attuned the dragon is to the particular item or something to that effect. And so therefore, the longer it's away from them, the longer they get disconnected from it, and the more valuable it is to them, the more likely it is that they would go seek it out. So if you like stole a coin from them, yeah, they might be able to find it, but it's just a coin. Like I don't really need to go find a singular coin. But if you stole like some godlike helmet or some like large piece of their thing that they had been known for, that they've been known to protect, like you're talking about, then that might be something that again they're very connected to, and they would be motivated to go at least find a way to get returned to their horde or something to that effect. So I can see that, though. I can definitely see that.
All right, so third edition. Third edition did quite a bit of what second edition did. Just really tried to continue giving us more expanded lore, expanded history, connections, ways to utilize it. Chromatic and metallic dragons didn't get any additions in terms of new dragons, but they just enhanced their abilities and refined some of the age categories a little bit. So they scaled a little bit better for adventuring. Again, trying to make it easier and cleaner for the larger party. The Gen dragons were they basically got reintroduced. So slight tweaks here and there, trying to reestablish them as another primary set of dragons. But we did get a couple new introductions as well in some third edition supplements. So in third edition, we got introduced to the Prismatic Dragon, a powerful planar dragon with prismatic.
I am familiar with that one.
We also got introduced to the Force Dragon, a cosmic dragon with force-based powers. And Styx Dragon, associated with the River Styx.
I keep thinking of like Star Wars Force.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. No, like, yeah. So we have like the River Styx type of dragon, like the fairy, the ferryman type of dragon. So again, going right along and following the coattails of second edition, adding in the fact that no matter where you go, there is a dragon as part of that pantheon, which again is so interesting that they double down on that. Like the more that they enhance this, the more they show that dragons have touched every aspect of creation and the mortal experience. We also got a couple
like a dragon of life, there's a dragon of death, and there's a dragon of creation, and a dragon of destruction, and a dragon of war, and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I like that, because like it just shows that, no matter where you look, they were there, right? They had a hand in it. We also got more expansion upon the Dracolich, and some templated options. So what they did was they basically templated this out so you can alter it. So it's not just one Dracolich, but it's more of a, hey, here's the base idea of it, but here's how you can tweak it yourself. So again, some better play for DMs. And we also got the introduction of half dragons. Basically, it was a template that was given to DMs for homebrewing to create unions between dragons and other creatures. So they were half dragons, and they kind of gave you a template to, develop multiple types of creatures, like a dragon and a horse or something, or a dragon and a dire wolf, or
interesting.
A dragon. I'm just trying to think of like, this would be third and 3.5. But yeah, the half dragon was basically just an opportunity to create dragon-like creatures with a subtle template I think it was from the DMG that offered that, but I can't remember if that was from a specific supplement or if it was in the core DMG. And then we also got introduced to this Song Dragon.
That's what they used to. I'm curious if that's what they used to birth like the actual dragonborn race, like half dragon, half humanoid, or something.
I think so. That would make sense. That's where they kind of started to go with it. And we also got introduced to the Song Dragon, so just another type of dragon, but tie into music and culture kind of aspect. So we got new levels of complexity in terms new levels of complexity in how to play them. They reintroduced the Draconomicon in 2003 again, where they basically scaled everything up, offering better challenges at all of the age ranges. So like, instead of it just being young, adult, and ancient, adult had multiple categories within. So again, you had a much better progression. They detailed out better types, better usages, better strategies, and a little bit better of like how you can expect to DM them, right? Because again, third edition took a lot what second edition was trying to do, but this was the beginning of trying to make it a lot more approachable to everyone, and not so much the traditional D&D players, right? Because up until second edition, you kind of just D&D had to be your thing. Third edition was really the introduction into, or the start of the, how do we make this acceptable to anyone who wants to play? And then third edition started to integrate it more into the standard type of campaign settings. So third edition, you would see supplements suggesting that dragons would basically be in control of kingdoms via influence, whether that was polymorphing and being an advisor, to subjugating a town and using it's the people as intermediaries, what have you. But the idea that it wasn't just this complex, they're off by themselves doing their own thing and you have to go insert yourself into them. And it's no longer just a go do it to get money and get gold and get XP. Now, third edition was like, well, why can't dragons be responsible for the things that are happening? Why can't you have a regular BBEG that turns out to be influenced by a dragon? And that's what it was really trying to do with third edition, is bring dragons into the standard gameplay model as not just a monster, not just a BBEG, but something a little bit more intriguing and more detailed that you could actually,
I heard
get in there.
I heard this beautiful, beautiful concept that I really, really want to like steal one of these days, where there is this dragon and it ended up basically being it portrayed itself as a shopkeep, like a tavern owner, right? And what most people don't realize is that everybody in this town is an ex-adventurer, and the dragon's horde is actually the adventurers themselves. It is collecting these adventurers, and it's like in charge of this town, and like very, very subtly, very, very behind the scenes. And it just like I really
That's
wish I
kind of
could
cool.
find like the TikTok or the Instagram post that interested that described it, because it was this brand new group of adventurers that went into this in this town, and they started talking to this shopkeep, and the shopkeep was trying to get him to go on this mission. And I forget how they ended up like discovering what was going on, but it was such a cool concept that this dragon would collect adventurers. And like the blacksmith in the town was an ex-adventurer that's like this really expert blacksmith, and like all the people that were here, like the town church who used to be a cleric or a paladin or whatever. It was such a cool concept, and so I love this idea, and I would love to like build that out in my world, like in some way, shape, or form. But no, it was very cool, and that's what a lot of this reminds me of actually involving dragons in not necessarily the politics specifically, but just in the world's creation and the foundation of everything that's there. So
Yeah,
yeah.
getting them into a more usable state and not always as the precipice of the game, I think is a lot more valuable to
Mhm.
them as a mechanic and as a tool. And you also brought up Dragonborn earlier. So we didn't quite get the official Dragonborn race just yet, but third edition did introduce the now that we have more of this concept of dragons just everywhere and influencing things and being just having their hands and everything. We did get the first introduction of draconic bloodlines. Now, this was first introduced in supplementals as a concept for plot points. The concept of whether it's the player or the BBEG having dragonborn ancestry. Essentially, these draconic bloodlines, dragonborn ancestry, the concept that things could happen because dragons influenced your bloodline. But it wasn't officially just a race just yet. But yeah, we started to get this idea that somewhere way deep in your past, your bloodline could have gotten infected by dragons somehow, and therefore that gives you maybe the rights to a throne. It could maybe give you some extra magical resistance. Like, it wasn't hard, fast rules. It was just more plot point based of, why does this matter? Maybe you could go in front and maybe you'll be accepted by, the dragon kind, and they won't immediately, off you because you have dragon blood, and therefore you can, be accepted into their society, something, right? It was mainly just a way to say like, hey, here's yet another way dragons are still affecting the mortal plane.
Okay, I like that. I like that.
We got another advancement officially now, because I told you before in second edition, we basically got the idea that dragons were full-blown spellcasters. Well, in third edition, they officially stated that dragons were the equivalent of sorcerers with high resistance and immunities. Their devastating breath weapon. But basically, dragons in third edition were equivalent to sorcerers in terms of spellcasting.
And
how a dragon fucked my family.
Their own subclass in sorcerers.
Right. What's going on, Marty? Nice to see you.
Facts. Welcome.
Oh, and They also got a new ability called Frightful Presence, and this is basically a fear-inducing aura that dragons have.
Ooh, yes.
So I
Yes,
think
yes,
that's kind of
yes.
cool. Just having that just concept of just being near them just makes you have chills, right? Like it's fucking awesome. Reminds me of the class we just did, the Dread class,
It,
or the Cleric Divinity.
oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know why,
Um,
but it always brings me back to when I was watching Hunter x Hunter, and they first were walking into this like one area of the tower, and it was just like this presence that was like so daunting on them they couldn't even walk through. It gives me those types of vibes, like
mhm.
when you are in the presence of a dragon, like you are stunned into not necessarily silence but just stagnation. You can't do anything. You are frozen in place in true fear. So wild.
Also, with the Draconomicon, just to kind of go into more detail, because we've mentioned it a couple times, but if you really are interested, the Draconomicon is basically the entire expanded lore, but it also goes into things like biology, psychology, and the social structure of all of the dragon types. So I find that's a really good resource if you're trying to understand or integrate more complex aspects of dragons. That's really, really important. It also goes into the dragon aging in a lot of detail, all the way from the wormling to the worm. And remember, the worm was like just even like bigger and badder than the ancient dragons, right? Um, so it also, the Draconomicon was also the first introduction of the draconic magic and language of draconic. Like, we officially got draconic from that as well. Um, it goes over things like what planes each of the dragons were tied to on the cosmological scale. Planar dragons, they had planar dragons from everything like shadow, chaos, and time. And then, we just look at the chromatic and metallic ones as being like the prime-material plane. But they started to basically come from everywhere and touch everything. Um, and we also got the introduction of dragon spawn. Um, Basically, these were experiments created by either Tiamat or other dragon deities, and they were usually products of magical experiments reflecting the dark side of draconic ambition. So, kind of more of another aspect for DMs to take, and being able to see that dragons wanted more for themselves than just what they were, and even they went to some really crazy, crazy extents in order to enhance themselves, and gave a lot of really interesting ideas on what you can do with dragon spawn. What can you do with a mutated dragon?
Really wild. You can do some crazy things.
And we talked about this before. So previously, it was basically just the age categories with not a lot in between. But again, now that we have third edition trying to capitalize and make sure that it has a good progression, instead of it just being the young adult and ancient, instead of it just being worm lane to dragon, and then throughout the stages, we have 12 age categories that range from wormling to great worm. So we have 12 official categories or age definitions of dragons, which before, I mean, again, we were really just working with 3 to 5, maybe 6, and most of those were just handled with, well, it's older than the last one, so it's stronger. This was the first time it was like, here are 12 of your size categories. I probably should have written them all down, but I didn't.
Size categories or age categories?
It's technically the same thing. So we have here.
I guess that's fair enough.
Pretty good. No. I didn't write these down. Which makes sense because I don't have a lot of 3.5 options. But But yes, here we go. So the types of dragons that you no. Hang on. I'm gonna check one more of my resources, and if I can, I'll see if I can list them all. 3.5 is so hard to research.
Weirdly enough, I feel like you would have a lot more references than second edition, but again, I feel like it was, I don't want to say less popular than second edition, but I feel like it was shorter lived than second edition, which is likely why they had 3 and then 3.5. I would honestly call 2024 fifth edition 5.5. Like, that's probably just because it's a little bit more concise than 2024, but still.
Gotcha. Here we go. Okay. Yeah. Found a chart. Yes. Okay. So here was the new and improved age categories broken down in third edition. So starting with wormlings. This was age 0 to 5. They were small, size small, basically weak, inexperienced, but compared to your average creature that you would run into in the forest, still formidable. And this is basically just the youngest type of dragon that you will see outside of an egg. And usually you won't.
Think of size small, I think of like the size of a cat. Like that size.
Well, this is D&D size small. So like ones like yeah.
That's what I mean. In D&D, size small, like a size of a cat is small. Tiny is like the size of like an insect or something like that.
Yeah. So this is going to be like, you know, up to
you're going to get into medium-sized creatures.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where you're looking at there. So after Wormling, you get to very young. This is age 6 to 15. They get to a size medium at this point. They do get stronger, and they finally really start to generate their breath weapon at this point. And they start to develop their natural armor, but they don't really have any skill sets, essentially. Both of these are usually found nearby in terms of their parental layer. They haven't really gone off and done their own thing yet. And then young, so we have 16 to 25.
Living at home with mom and dad.
Yeah, 16 to 25 as young, still considered medium. We finally get more physical and magical strength, so it starts to develop its resistances, and it gets, I think the next stage it gets its full breath weapon effect. And then this is where you'll start to see it developing its own horde, and beginning to potentially, this is the youngest you would find away from a parent. So it might be trying to develop its own horde, might be, you might catch it stealing, you might even catch it trying to establish a horde somewhere, in like a cave. But this one, the parents won't be very far. It may be alone, but the parents won't be very far away. The very young in the worm lane, if you find it, the parents already know it. It's already too late because the parents probably smelled you. Once we get to juvenile, the
question is, how involved are the parents in this front? Like, are they super protective over their kids? And if so, for how long?
Up until about juvenile. Juvenile is when they start to go away. Like, again, that's when they start to develop their independence. Once they get to that young adult stage, this is when they're going to start to basically find their own lair and go off. But juvenile, so we have juvenile at 26 to 50. They've now established themselves as a large creature. So they've now gotten up to large size. This is basically one of the most significant growth spurts that they have in their physical size, or like their earliest growth spurts. This is where they get their innate spell casting and a lot of their advanced magical abilities. So this is where, depending on the type of dragon they are, they're going to get some of their, special spell casting options. And then young adult, so 51 to 100, maintaining size large. This is when it's going to get its first level of damage reduction and immunity to specific effects based on the type. So if it's a red dragon, it'll officially be immune to fire at this point.
Right. Okay.
And its layer and horde begin to grow, and its influence expands. So basically, at age young, the 16 to 25, it's starting to understand how to be a dragon on its own. Between young adult and adult, it's probably found and established its own horde, or at least its own location, and it'll probably no longer, unless societal wise, it'll probably no longer be hanging around the parents. So at this point, you're more likely to run into it by itself. As it gets to the adult, 101 to 200 years old, we now get to size huge. We get another increase in its damage reduction and an expansion in its spell casting. And at this point, it will have, or typically will have, a well-established layer and horde. Before this, it was basically just starting out, just beginning to build it. At this point, an adult is going to have what you would consider an actual horde. Like this is the youngest you would want to go after if you're trying to get the most out of your money, right? Anything before this, it's just more pain than it is the reward. We get to mature adults, so 201 to 400 years old. It maintains its size of huge. It gets stronger spell casting. It gains its natural armor, and its breath weapon potency is now at its max, I believe. Yes. And a mature adult dragon starts to have more of a widespread influence. So this is the age that you would start to expect it to start utilizing it in things like taking over, kingdoms, or influencing just nearby lesser intelligent creatures. And at this point, it would be considered to have an immense horde. An old dragon, this is category 8. An old dragon is 401 to 600 years old. It is still size huge. It has mastered pretty much all of its abilities. It gets another stronger damage reduction and magical resistances. And old dragons often control vast territories and serve as patrons of dragon cults. So now this one's going to basically have a following. At this age, you would expect it to have some sort of following from younger dragons. And it's no longer just like a kingdom or the nearby village. This will probably have a region, right? It'll probably have multiple kingdoms or multiple nobilities, different towns. Just its reach is now far beyond what it's staying next to. Now we go to very old, category 9.
When they talk about patrons, that automatically makes me think about warlocks. Do you think a dragon of this stature would be powerful enough to have something like a warlock?
It's no. So this is different terminology. This isn't patron as you think of it in 5th edition. Patron just meaning like your patron as in your boss. Like cults will assume that this dragon is powerful enough to follow and to pray to and bring trinkets and do all of that stuff. It is a patron more in word than anything else, but it is not a entity that can give power to a mortal.
Is that something that likely a dragon will never reach?
That's still considered
level? Or is that
because that's like it would have to be like a godhood, like at that point, because when it comes to patrons and gods giving out power, you basically have to be in that deity or otherworldly level in order to be able to establish that kind of connection. Dragons have a lot of power, but they don't have givable power, at least by the core rule sets in 3rd edition. Let's see. So very old, we have 601 to 800. This is one of its next big jumps because now we get to size gargantuan. And this is category 9, very old. We gain greater physical strength, magical abilities, and layer defenses. Very old dragons are legendary in their regions, often feared or revered by civilizations. So again, not just a town. You're talking about you grew up. You could be 80 years old, and since you were a child, the name of this dragon is whispered in your town, right? Like, this is one of those things where an entire continent knows this dragon exists. This is like the Mount Vesuvius, of that continent. Like, everyone knows, don't disturb this dragon. It's in every child's nursery rhymes. That level of the entire civilization is it may not be praying to you, but it's kind of think about the chupacabra in Mexico, right? It's just one of those things. There is not anyone who would hear your name and be like, who? So when you're that old, you've been around long enough, you've gotten enough attention, and you've done enough things. Your name is everything. And there isn't just anybody who doesn't respect that name. After very old, category 10 is when we finally get to ancient. Now, this is where it used to max. It does not. It goes 2 further. But this was the original max at 801 to 1,000 years old, still gargantuan size, near deific power. So basically, this is just shy of deity level. Like deities would still think twice before stepping into an ancient dragon's lair. Like they know they'd walk out, but they wouldn't want to. Their devastating breath weapon and spell immunities basically, just make it, like they just walk in a park for anything that's not its own level. The durability, its AC and hit points are basically just unmatched by anything living. And typically your ancient dragon hordes are gonna contain things of relics of forgotten civilizations. So this is your chance. If you're taking down an ancient dragon, you're walking away with something that doesn't even have a name. Like, it is so old you can't even pronounce its name, but it does some shit. This is where you're gonna walk away with like the Ring of Perfect Wish, or the Ring of Many Wishes, or something like that. Like, this is where you're gonna get like the item of all items, or this is where you put the campaign plot item. Like, this is the thing you need to save the world kind of concept. But of course, there's more, because that's where it used to end. But we have 2 more categories.
There's more.
Beyond ancient. Once you get after 1,000 years, between 1,001 and 1,200 years old, you remain gargantuan, but now the dragon is a worm. Fully developed dragons of immense might. A worm is a living legend and significant force in the world, often shaping history and events. So this is that, before this, you just were known by civilizations. At this point, you made and broke civilizations. If you're a worm, you haven't just seen it all, you've done it. You've helped raise entire, continents. You've devastated. You've probably done genocide just by rolling over in your sleep kind of concept. You know what I mean? Like, your history is the history of the land itself. But that's not where we end it. Once you have reached past 1,200 years and you were at least 1,201 years old or older, you were considered a great worm. You are now size colossal. This is the pinnacle of dragon power. They are near godlike in their abilities. Compared to other dragons, they are gods. Their breath weapon damage is no match for anything living. Basically, just it's any type of damage it is, it's still incineration. Doesn't matter if it's cold, doesn't matter if it's fire, doesn't matter if it's lightning, your atoms are gone. Spell casting is at its all-time high. I mean, there's no mortal spellcaster that can match their spellcasting abilities at this point. Their layer influence. I mean, at this point, you're talking about, nearly a planet is at your disposal in terms of the influence. Your layer itself is, the biggest cavern that the planet can, reside on. Essentially, this is either your campaign ending threat or that Deus Ex Machina mythical ally. Like, typically your great worms are either the thing you need the relic to stop, or they're the thing that told you to go get the relic to stop the other thing from happening. Like, you typically don't fight a great worm. They're purely intended for lore.
So I know that this is still 3rd and 3.5, but when it comes to something like immunity, I'm assuming there is ways as mortals to get immunity from certain types of damage, even in 3.5. Would you say, like, if you were up against like a cold dragon and you take its breath weapon to the face, you could just stare it down? Now, granted, you're not necessarily going to take its claw. Like, your claw could.
In terms of a great worm, I don't know if I would rule like a great worm's breath weapon. I don't know if a mortal could have immunity to it. Like, personally, because of this fact that this is basically the goddess, that this is the god version of dragons, I'm gonna say that if you are not immortal or higher, there is no
So
immunity to
would
that.
you
That is
say
literally a god's
like
level power.
Tiamat is a great worm?
Oh,
Is
absolutely,
that what you're
100%,
saying?
100% is in this
Okay.
particular case.
So
There, if not
Tiamat and
greater than that,
what was the
if
other
not
one?
another step higher, Bahamut. But they would be considered your
That's
great
kind of what I
worms.
was thinking. Like there might be yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, great worms versus Tarask. Great worms, 100%. Tarask is only huge,
Yeah.
or maybe even I don't even think it's maybe it's gargantuan, but yeah, there's no way between a great worm, Tarask has no
That's the
chance.
question.
Because you gotta realize like a Tarask is like, there's usually only one, um and it usually has like only one per planet. It's usually really really big, but I don't even think it's gargantuan. So the colossal size of the great worm and its godlike power, the Tarask is just a huge mortal beast, right? It's like the greatest of mortal beasts, but it doesn't have the same enriched background that dragons do. You looking that up real quick?
I'm trying to, yeah.
All right, cool. I'm gonna use the restroom real quick, and then we will move on.
They are gargantuan.
Okay, so they're gargantuan based.
But yeah, like I know you probably don't have like a stat block or anything like that, but they have like over 600 hit points.
Yeah, not even close to a great worm though. Like a great worm at that point has thousands.
Yeah.
I'll be right back.
Yeah. Oh, that's very interesting. Cosmic, welcome to the chat. Good to see you. But no, this is very interesting. Like seeing like Tiamat as a great worm. Like I was thinking originally they'd be like a step higher than that, but I can see this sort of equivalency going on when it comes to the hierarchy of dragons and like what they can actually do, and uh, I can only imagine like what's the scales like. I swear I wish I could bring up like a picture for you guys of like the scale of like humans versus all the different size categories.
There's actually a really good one. There's a YouTube video that does it. That shows them like all of the different sizes for like for D&D and a couple other games, but it's like game creature sizes, and it's actually kind of cool. But yeah, and the thing about Tiamat and Bahamut though is like you got to realize too, they are the oldest. So even though we have these categories, if they were the first, yes, they were great worms, but like at the same time, if they were older than a great worm before they created the rest of the dragons, like they could be something so far beyond a great worm that it's not even comprehensible. Like there is no category. They are just the embodiment of a god, right? Like, and that's the thing. For me, Tiamat and Bahamut are gods, right? A great worm is not a god. It is godlike. But that's where to me, there's a distinction.
Okay.
So a great worm, like a great worm wouldn't become a god because of age. Tiamat and Bahamut are essentially gods due to what they are. They are the first, the oldest, and we're here before everything else. But a dragon doesn't become a god just by pure age, right? You don't just live to become a god. It's still an ascension. You still have to get to that point where that immortality and that godhood is still earned.
Are gods. How would you say that they would compare against, like, okay, do you have Tiamat in High Point?
Yes.
Okay. So if Tiamat's in High Point and Tiamat, for whatever reason, decides to square up to an actual ascended god that has a domain, what would you say that looks like? Like, is it like not a challenge, or would you say there's a possibility that god could get destroyed by Tiamat?
It depends on the god. I mean, if it's Zenith, there's a little bit of a power struggle there, because even though Zenith has a lot of reverence and respect for Tiamat for who they are, it's that whole, but this is still High Point. Like High Point and Zenith are kind of the pinnacle.
It
But
was
beyond
like
that, any other, like if a mortal, like if Dov descended, you would not stand a chance against Tiamat. Like you going up, like if Dov were to ascend and go against Tiamat, that would be, you know, the equivalent of. Well, let's see. I'm trying to think of. Okay, so put it this way: any of like notable god that's not of equal historical reverence like Tiamat, right? Like, you know, going beyond things like Zeus or Odin or Queen Mab, right? Like going beyond the things that are already on par. If we're just talking about like a grand god, like a god of actual worth, of actual stature, but not, you know, one of the, you know, the essentials, if you will, right? Them going up against Tiamat would be like the equivalent of a fresh ascended immortal trying to go in against one of the saints in High Point.
like the god of rap, the one that we talked about a while ago. I swear it was Dax.
Yeah.
Somebody in his position. He's lightweight, fresh on the scene as a god.
Yeah, he would have no chance at Tiamat. Like if he went up against toe to toe against Tiamat, Tiamat would just wipe the floor. Like it's in terms of raw power, it's not even a question.
Interesting.
But that's just because, again, it comes down to how
it takes time to.
Yeah, god hierarchy is complex because it's not just about the mantle you hold. You know, like there's a lot more to it because it's time in. It's kind of like military, right? It's time in grade, but it's also it's also like the job that you do, right? Like you can have a higher ranked person have a lesser job than you, and there's a respect level, right? You could be the lowest rank on, you know, you could be the lowest ranked soldier, but if you're a ranger and you're the lowest rank, it doesn't matter. A higher ranked paper pusher is going to have more respect for you than you do for them. You know what I'm saying? So you could get into a high ranking position as a god, but not have the respect and ability to use that position properly. So it's
like that as talking about military, the difference between a fresh out of OCS officer versus a chief with 30 years in the service, right? They've been in forever, and but they're still technically a lower rank than that officer.
Exactly. Or take that same example. You have, you know, an fresh out of OES officer versus a first sergeant who just became an officer. They're both brand new. They are both the lowest ranking officer, and they're both brand new. But who are you going to respect more? The guy who has 20 years of combat experience, or the one who read a book? Right? So that's the complexity, is like, just because you own the same mantle or the same power mantle, but I know how to use my mantle better. We have the same exact power, but I can outthink you, and therefore I can take you out. Versus I could be smarter than you, but if you happen to hold a mantle of higher power, you could get lucky. But that doesn't mean you will. Doesn't mean you know what you're doing with it. So yes, most gods, in terms of, that's why I say it's like when you are one of those more essentials, it's not just that you're essential, so I won't let it happen. It's like the mantle you hold is already uber powerful, but people who hold those essential mantles typically aren't fresh off the press, right? They're people who know what they're doing with said mantle. So it's not just how old and powerful Tiamat is, it's also how much experience Tiamat has. So any normal god in High Point just doesn't have a chance because Tiamat's older than Zenith itself, like himself, right? Like, even though they would never come at odds and clash, it's just not even a fathomable concept of Zenith technically in High Point holds a higher mantle than Tiamat. But there's no possible way I would say Zenith has the same understanding of that power that Tiamat does. So Tiamat may know that that Zenith can, here in High Point, blink him out of existence if he wanted to. But you can't kill Tiamat. Like, And Tiamat knows that. Like, I may not be here in High Point, but she ain't getting rid of me. And if I really mattered, if it mattered, I'd come back and whoop your ass for doing that. Like, it's that whole thing of like, it has those layers of you can't kill what's eternal. You know what I mean? So even though you don't see me anymore, there's that level of Zenith can be gone 100%, but can Tiamat? Can you actually get rid of something that exists everywhere and is the sole purpose for the very create? And again, I chose Forgotten Realms. So Forgotten Realms has that baked into it for its creation, even with all of the crystal spheres. So even though Zenith can eject anyone he wants out of his crystal sphere, he also understands that that power is only limited in the sphere that he influences. So in reality, is Zenith more powerful than Tiamat? What do you call that? Like, how do you judge that when it's that complex?
That's very fair. It is very fair. Okay, this is the type of dynamics that I feel like now you wouldn't say the same thing about any old Great Worm.
Correct.
Specifically Tiamat and Bahamut.
Correct.
Specifically the ones that have been around forever. Like
they are baked into the lore as the first, right? Yeah. Zenith will have a Great Worm as a pet.
Okay.
Put it that way. Zenith would have a Great Worm as a pet. Like, that's
sure.
He wouldn't because of, of respect, but the idea that in terms of power, Zenith could have one as a pet. The Saints could have one as a pet. Anybody lower than that, you better be making it a really sweet deal for that worm to even consider dealing with you, because again, the worm is a god and may not be a god in terms of the hierarchy, but it doesn't care about another god in terms of their job, right? It doesn't bother that Great Worm. That Great Worm has its own priorities. So if you're not something that can blink it out of existence, you better make it a really sweet deal. Otherwise, it's just going to ignore it. Or it's going to eat you, depending upon how low you are. But speaking of more hierarchies, we do have from 3rd edition, they also gave us a cosmic hierarchy for dragons as well. Talking about we just went over the 12 categories in terms of ages. But because we now have the expanded influence of the planes and the planar dragons, such as the astral dragon, the prismatic dragon, the shadow dragon, they often are portrayed and encouraged to act as emissaries of these cosmic forces. So you may not have, a Tiamat level prismatic dragon, but you are encouraged to have a prismatic dragon that could act like on that behalf, right? On that level of all prismatic dragons. And then it also went into even more rivalries and just kind of broke down like, yes, chromatic versus metallic, but even within the chromatics, which ones didn't like each other and which ones would usurp each other, right? So again, we got more of that zoomed in societal concept to where no matter what you were doing, you'd be able to get a different experience every time you interact with them. Other things that they did for the hordes, a couple little extra like flavorings that they added because they kept wanting to personalize them. Again, not just reflecting what they were and what they wanted, but they really wanted to understand like how do you reflect the horde against the nature, the alignment, right? Not just red dragons like rocks, right? But like they're evil. So what does that mean? So a lot of the chromatic dragons, the evil dragons, most of their wealth would be things like stolen wealth. So that's where you would have the coins, right? Things that people wouldn't want to live with. But the good dragons, on the other times, would often have treasures that weren't so much taken from people as they were protected from falling into the wrong hands. Like, let's say you had a great war and an evil an evil king was going to come through. So good dragons could hide that treasure from that king in order to prevent him from gaining power in their area. Things of that kind of nature. So just
Say
more
it would be
personal.
likely that somebody would go to them and be like, "Hey, we're coming to you, dragon, to protect this thing from this evil that might be coming our way."
It could be that. It could be that the dragon came across a very powerful magical item, and instead of wanting to hoard it for himself, they want to keep it out of the hands of somebody. So they put it in their hoard purely as a preventative measure. So it's not so much of a distinction of what you'll find, it's more of the reasons why. Evil dragons want it for themselves. They want to steal, they want to take it from people. Whereas the good dragons are just making sure that, um, you know, that things, the balance is maintained, right? Which is also why if you're going to an evil dragon for a relic, you're more likely to need to fight for it. You're more likely to need to steal it. You're going to have to, do something really clever. Whereas with a good dragon, maybe you can reason with them. Maybe you can tell them that in your hands, that artifact is going to do nothing but good. And in fact, you're going to prevent a great evil with it, right? So giving DMs a lot more opportunities to interact with dragons and understand, like, if I want to put it in a good dragon's hoard, it's not just going to be a fight. But if I put it in a bad dragon's hoard, it doesn't necessarily have to be a fight, but it's not going to be a talk. You're not just going to ask him for it and he gives it to you. And again, it's things that I like where they're not forcing you to do one thing or the other, but they're giving you as a DM enough of that background, enough of that lore, and enough understanding to take it, be consistent with it, but do what makes sense for your lore.
What's that?
Modern day dragons hoard cards in video games.
That would be wild. I want to see that. Freaking comic books and stuff.
Third edition also really emphasized the idea of magical hoards, so leaning less on just pure value, and also being able to be an opportunity for people to swap out their weapons, swap out their gear, upgrade, essentially an opportunity, especially with Dragon Horde specifically, to allow them that game-changing moment, right? Going from maybe a +1 to a +5, sword. Finally picking up that +2 shield, finally picking up that, cloak of invisibility, like really hammering it down. Like, again, big risk, big reward, but third edition really wanted to get away from the trinkets and really into what makes the game more playable. Now, granted, is that a good thing, bad thing? Again, that's more of it's easier to be for everyone if everyone walks away with something, and not everybody just wants gold. Not everybody can level up right now, but everybody can walk away with some kind of magical item. And we also got a little bit more intricate details on how to set up dragon layers and hordes. Instead of it just being a giant pile in a cave, now we get things more like intricate mazes, traps, basically more like an official dungeon. Instead of it just being a hole in the ground that you just go in, kill it, and take it all out, now it was more of even if you got the dragon down, you still had to get to the treasure. You still had to get it out. You still had to do more than just kill it and you had it.
A Jones style stuff.
Exactly. Which again, just makes it for more interesting gameplay than just, yep, we killed it. How do we take all of this tons of gold out? But, having a trap that might melt it in lava or, solidify all the gold so you can't drag it out, right? Like, I could see a red dragon doing that. Like, what does it care? Like, I can imagine just, having a trap where all of its gold just gets like melted, and now it's still worth it. It's still worth the same value. It's just one giant block instead of, in a bunch of nice little neat chests. These are things that would be like really fun
Fair
to do.
enough.
Like, imagine just like an entire vault where there's a bunch of treasure chests inside. Like, you're told, like, there's just chests laying in rows, but when you get there was like a catastrophic event, and it just looked like there's like, it just burned down insanely. But you're like, either all of the chests look destroyed or they all look pristinely intact. But the idea is that the catastrophe got it so hot that when you open the chests or when you remove the debris, all of the gold that was ever in the chest has now been fused. So it's like, instead of having like 20 chests worth of gold coins, you have 20 300-pound gold bricks that you have to that the party now has to figure out, how do we get out of here? How do we refine? Like, how do we do this?
You have to have some stupid amount of bags of holding, for sure.
Oh yeah, bags of holding is pretty much the solution for that. All right, well, let's talk quickly about 4th edition because no one really cares. So chromatic and metallic dragons, they kept the same normal types. They tried to update the lore a little bit to include with like the Dawn War and planar conflicts. Basically, they try to do more lore integration, so they keep the importance of gods or the importance of dragons in the 4th edition setting while they were getting rid of a bunch of like the magic and other aspects, right? So they just tried to modify the lore to make it work as best they could. They did give us 2 new dragons, or a couple new dragons. They gave us 2 new planar dragons, the Shadowfell dragon and the Feywild dragon. So we got the expansion there. Again, great, because it's just showing that dragons were intricate everywhere, or integral everywhere. We got the catastrophic dragons. These are dragons of elemental forces of the elemental forces of destruction. So unlike the prismatic and chromatic and metallic dragons, we got ones based off of elemental forces. So this is where we got the earthquake dragon, volcano dragon, blizzard dragon, typhoon dragon, and wildfire dragon. And we even got a brand new unique one called the chaos dragon, tied to the elemental plane of chaos.
Absolutely sick.
They cool. Did more integration into the cosmology and the creation of the world. Most of the, again, doing a lot more integral tie-ins with gods, cosmic forces, basically just making dragons even more specific to the fact that everything is here. Oh, a portable hole. Yep, you could definitely do it with a portable hole too. That's an easy way to just suck up a lot of treasure.
Idea. That's a great idea.
Oh, and 4th edition is what gave us the core playable race of Dragonborn.
Is it? Okay, good for you.
Let's see. So, just a couple lore changes. Nothing that, nothing that we really need to keep, paying attention to. I mean, there was a supplemental called Scales of War, which just gave more credence to the fact that they were just uber powerful. I know, yeah, 4th edition finally doing something right for once. Dragons were often seen as, ancient forces guarding primordial secrets or information, basically the keepers of ancient knowledge that is intentionally lost to nowadays. Breath weapons became more strategic with area effects, so this is where we're getting less of just the cone and it's actually doing environmental effects. They also had distinct combat roles in 4th edition. Their abilities scaled smoothly with all the levels instead of with their age gaps. And let's see. So part of the tie-in with the lore, the Dawn War, is basically the conflict between gods and primordials, of which dragons were part of the primordials. So essentially they got kind of caught in the crossfire of the Great War, so just trying to integrate more with all of the changes that 4th edition did with their setting to try to understand why dragons were still around if everything else wasn't. And the introduction of the playable race Dragonborn, where they were humanoid descendants of dragons tied to draconic deities and culture. This we saw previously in 3rd edition with the introduction of the dragon lineages, the Dragonborn lineage, and the dragon bloodlines. So they finally eventually allowed for a full Dragonborn race. Hierarchy for 4th edition. Interesting. So what they did in 4th edition was that they kind of separated it out in terms of because of the Dawn War, because the primordials versus the gods. What they ended up doing here was that dragons ended up being split between the sides of that war. So metallic dragons, the good dragons, ended up siding with the gods in that war. And the chromatic or evil dragons started to side with the primordials in that aspect. So this is their way of explaining why there's such a deep separation between chromatic and metallic, outside of one followed an evil god, and one followed the good god of dragons. This kind of integrated it more with why there was that divide in the first place. And that was because they each chose a different side in the war, And kind of like, any Family Feud, it just goes on for generations and no one even knows why. A horde of a dragon with the children that he produced with nobles 1,000 years later, the whole continent claims to be descendants from him. That makes a lot of sense. I could actually see that, like a whole area that just has draconic lineage from one dragon.
Be very interesting. That could be that particular dragon's horde. My horde of children.
We also got introduced to a concept, right? We got an introduction to something called the Elder Dragons. Essentially, these were the ruling faction of dragons. Age still played a major part. Yeah, fourth edition. Age still played a major part, but Elder Dragons were essentially the what you would call like the titled rulers, right? So these were, like if you had a clan and that clan had a leader, they would be an Elder Dragon, right? Like it was more of a title than it was a category, if that makes more sense. They also got environmental impacts in terms of like their horde, for instance. So the dragon's horde would actually influence the surroundings it was kept in. So their greed and magic imbue the treasure with an aura of power, which in effect could affect those that approached it, enhancing the danger. So this could be anything from, just luring people into their demise, because it's just the greed got over, got too much of them. Or it could be things like confusion. It could be a charm. There's a lot of different ways that DMs would be able to utilize this in order to have these aura or these area of effects because of the massive amounts of magical energy that's being siphoned, basically between the dragon and all of the gold. And you think about it, right? The more expensive something is, the better the magical item it can become. So imagine just a dragon that oozes an aura of magic sitting around the most valuable items in all of history for centuries. I would absolutely agree that they would eventually imbue themselves with some sort of byproduct of that magic. It just in general, right? Without the need for an enchantment.
Very
It's
cool.
just
That would
totally
be
makes
very
sense.
Cool.
So we were talking about before about how a dragon would be able to find you if you stole from them or something like that. That's this kind of concept, right? You have something that's very valuable, which means it can accept magic. You have a magical creature oozing magic, and you put those two things together over enough time. I'm totally okay with that having a knock-on effect. And fourth edition also added a small little bit as well in terms of like they try to add more of the importance of the horde. So in this particular case, it wasn't just a sign of their prowess and their adventuring and everything that the dragon did, but it was also supposed to keep the connection between the fact that they are keepers of historical knowledge and relics. So again, fourth edition was trying to lean into the fact that it's not just about a mass of treasure, it's about what is in that treasure that it holds, right? So again, instead of it just being, 1,000,000 gold, it's, 1,000 gold each, but you each get like a magical item that is very specific to you and your class. And that's it for fourth. So now we get to fifth edition. Now, Ken, we got to preface this now more than ever, and we're going to have to keep doing this every time we do these history ofs for the time being. We do not have full access to 2024. So when I talk about fifth edition, we are primarily talking about 2014. 5e 2014 is really where we're going with these. Anything that changes beyond this, we will do updates in the future. And on top of that, the lore shouldn't have changed too much, mainly just the mechanics. So we're hoping that this is going to be encompassing of anything that you can read about in the 2024 books. But once we get those, in, we can always do an update later. So the chromatic and metallic dragons, more refinements, more expansions, going back a little bit to the older ways, going back to a little bit more 3.5, but no new dragon types of that era. We get once again a third reintroduction of the gem dragons, so another redo of the amethyst, emerald, sapphire, topaz, and crystal dragons, because those were really popular, but again, now the more we get into the more modernized, the more cookie cutter level of gameplay, the idea that they were just the neutral dragons needed to be updated. We needed a little bit more reasons for them and uses for them. We did get introduction to some unique dragons, most notably the Moonstone Dragon and the Deep Dragon. Moonstone Dragon was a dreamlike dragon tied to the Feywild, while the Deep Dragon was the subterranean type tied to the Underdark. Ooh, that's an interesting. Like creating magic items, a magic crown made of the gold. Like that would be kind of cool. Like dragons actually making their own magical items out of like the hoard that they have.
Very cool.
That would be, yeah, that would be pretty dope.
Definitely gotta be a thing.
If not, we should make it a thing. And we also got a different concept of great worms has been expanded upon. So we have this the multiversal echoes. So these are basically unique versions of existing dragons. These are like the ultimate of ultimates. I guess they were introduced in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. So these are essentially take like your greatest dragon. That's what they're called, multiversal echoes. Like they're take your, whatever standard dragon and then just expand it beyond even that level, right? Like what's in between a great worm that just turned 12,000 and Tiamat? What's in between that? There's got to be something, right? Like, more expansions though. Obviously, we got more thematical mechanics. Things like layer actions are much bigger for 5th edition. We got a lot more things tied to the ages. So again, as it ages, we get more mechanics, more differences in how it acts, how it moves, how it reacts, how it fights. We even get regional effects in 5th edition. So again, depending on where it is, it'll get benefits or disadvantages. And then again, all of this making it to where it's a lot easier to put them in and make it make sense, right? You can put a dragon in the middle of the desert because there's a type of dragon and it'll have effects based on what type of dragon you put in the desert, right? Instead of it just feeling like you're just picking a color, picking an ability, and picking a place they found it, it's much more entwined with why all of that should make sense. So making it a little bit cleaner, a little bit easier for people to pick up and address utilizing dragons in a game that has it in its name. But what does this mean? Basically, dragons are able to alter the ecosystems, and and also had legendary actions, which basically granted them godlike power. So again, boons and buffs for being in the right locations and having, their lair be in the environment that they are best in, that they're best suited for. We also got modules like Horde of the Dragon Queen and Rise of Tiamat, which also brought more of those cult followings, more of just the here. Yes, we know why people followed, we know why people believe, but what are the extremists doing? What are those fanatics doing with this information? Let's see. They started to introduce more environmental effects against the players. So things like, making it difficult, not just like, hard to find, but making the like barren wastelands outside of the hordes, using environmental effects like toxic mist, adding to that, the puzzle aspect of breaking into the horde and breaking into their lairs and finding the treasure, adding more of these features that aren't just directly what the dragon's doing against you, but this idea that the dragon has shaped the entire area, not just buried a treasure somewhere. So you get a little bit more of this dynamic gameplay.
Was that you and I that were talking about like perhaps like a dragon like settling in an area and like completely changing the landscape? Like it didn't used to be an icy tundra, but because this dragon settled there, now it's like winter all the time type deal.
Exactly. That's exactly what 5th edition is talking about. Or at least the 5th edition, wants that. They want you to represent what's happening by that dragon. I think we did talk something similar about that, where nestling and taking control of an area and actually changing it over time.
Yeah, that sounds really familiar. Either it was like a TikTok I saw or we talked about it on one of our episodes, but no, I definitely like that concept.
Oh yeah, make it a noble tradition. The noble um, offers like materials to create like epic weapons, and so the horde just becomes a giant like armory. That could be again, and that's what, again, I know you probably weren't here earlier with that, but like in second and first edition, that's exactly what the hordes were kind of originally designed to start being able to do, was represent like aspects of that. I like that, where there's just this horde that's growing of weapons, because that's just the tradition, is every generation they build like the best weapon. Or can you imagine like a culture where it's like, you know, either the best, the best craftsmen have to make the best of the best item and give them to the dragon? Or can you imagine like after every great war, right? Like after the town or the kingdom wins a war, the greatest warrior that got like the highest, like medal, has to go and relinquish his weapon to the dragon as like his retirement ceremony, as in I am the greatest warrior of my generation, here is my weapon. Yeah, and that's how it is. Like it's this idea of, it's just they've gathered, because it's just the tradition of, I'm now retiring, here's my shield, here's my sword, here's my helmet. And the dragon just accepts it and just constantly gets this influx of powerful items, purely because of no other reason than people just want to.
That reminds me of Love Murder's submission to us forever ago. Her blade and the armor that they submitted to us, and how it became what it became because of how much that they had done and how much that they had been over time, and that's what kind of turned it into the thing that it was. So I imagine, like, if they were like in this area that was owned by a dragon or whatever the case may be, that they would have been one of the people who had to go take it to the dragon and end up laying it there, and it becomes a part of their. I think that is a very, very cool concept.
Yeah,
Truly.
And again, fifth edition also, I think that we were the ones talking about this, because fifth edition also gave rise to, again, more of those environmental effects. So some of the suggestions they would give is like red dragons would create volcanic landscapes, green dragons forests, white dragons, blizzardy tundra. So yeah, that was definitely much more of what fifth edition wanted to do, to make it more ingrained. We also got a couple extras from Fizman's Treasury of Dragons. This expanded the lore even further and introduced the idea of the first world. Now, this is always something that I find fascinating, because again, having been started in second edition and Forgotten Realms, again, I started my DM in his own setting, and it fascinates me when I learn these things from this history, because a lot of the things I learned originally were just from his gameplay, so I knew that a lot of it wasn't official core rule books. But I always wondered how, it's always wondering like how much did he take from different things. And this is one of those ideas where fifth edition is the one that brought up the idea of the first world, but I also remember having that as part of the lore of dragons when I was first starting to play, is the dragon world, basically this untapped location that only certain dragons would be able to access, right? So yeah, little did I know it was from fifth edition, even though my DM used it in second. But the idea of the first world was the like a primeval plane that was shaped originally by Bahamut and Tiamat themselves. Like an entire plane they essentially created and crafted for dragons. So it is like the true dragon plane called the first world.
Like the Feywild, but for dragons.
Exactly. So that was just what we got as part of this. And also we also got yeah, they brought back gem dragons a little bit. The Great Cycle. So in Fizban's lore, also introduced the concept of dragons existing across multiple worlds simultaneously, with echoes of their souls persisting in various realities. So again, just this concept
Interesting.
behind they are everywhere and always watching. Like they just the idea that dragons literally are because that everything's here because of them. They are so integrated and they just keep doing it. They just keep adding that enrichment lore. And let's see here. So finally, the hierarchy. Age still remains the central aspect of hierarchy. The older you are, the powerful you are, the more revered you are. Obviously, also you also have to prove your your strength over those years. So you probably have done a lot worthy of your name. But we also got the inclusion of layer actions and regional effects. So this has just made dragons more and more dynamic and more interesting to go after than just a giant creature that has a lot of XP behind it. We got the first world that was originally shaped for all of them. They also had this concept where part of the great cycle is, in a sense, they exist in multiple locations essentially within the multiverse. But it also kind of hinted at basically all dragons are just echoes of Bahamut and Tiamat. Like, as in, they were the first and original dragons, and then everything else is just kind of a multiversal echo. Like, they were so powerful that it just literally their presence begat others. It was a very weird concept. I kind of liked the idea of just keeping it with the individual dragons, but tying them all to echoes of Bahamut and Tiamat is just one of those. I think it was one step too far. They didn't really need to go that far. They could have just kept it backed off as in a lineage. But hey, everyone goes. Of course, we got the introduction of the elder status for great worms. Again, more of the leaders of all of the great worms, the ones that people followed and listened to. We got more establishment of dragon societies, their territories, the rivalries, the alliances. Again, trying to go back to what 3rd edition was giving us and reestablish it for 5th edition instead of 4th. Metallic dragons were now more considered like the deliberators. They were more the mediators, and chromatic dragons tended to be your brute forces, right? So they're going to be you're more likely to see a chromatic dragon as the guard and a metallic dragon as the advisor in those like societal situations.
A little more role based.
Exactly. And of course, more concepts of like dragon cults, dragon lineages, dragonborn, just going more into that and just allowing it to be, 5th edition is trying to do that thing. And we've talked about this before where kind of like with deities, what they almost did by 5th edition was like before it was like, hey, here's how everything works. Here's how it's supposed to work. And here's why it works. And deities are a part of it. And we kind of talked about how 5th edition's more like, yeah, deities exist if you want. Anyway, here's how the game plays, right? It's like, it's not like they're not there. It's just 5th edition's like, if you want it. And then it's like, here's how you really play, though. It feels like 5th edition didn't want to do that with dragons, but they're almost forced to do that with dragons. They're like, hey, look at all this cool stuff we added. I know you don't need it, and I know you don't need to use dragons, but like you really, really should. Whereas deities, it was almost if you want, you know what I mean? So it is interesting. They're trying to keep the expansion. They're trying to keep the intrigue. They're trying to keep that dynamicism. But at the same time, it's like, this doesn't feel, again, it feels more lore than it does campaign. You know what I mean? It's so much pushed into the lore that it's like, I feel like I don't even need to interact with a dragon to have dragons in my game. And I feel like that's almost a bad thing in the sense that it feels like unless the DM really, really wants it, there's not as much of a benefit to just throw a dragon in your campaign now. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't feel as special.
Yeah.
It feels like it's just, it's another tool in your box. And if it happens, it's great. But I just feel like as we've gone through this, again, 2nd and 3rd edition made it feel like you were just like always like, man, are we gonna get a dragon this time? Like, are we gonna get a dragon this game? Are we gonna get a dragon this campaign? Nowadays, it's almost like, oh yeah, we could go run into a dragon, I guess. Like, you know what I mean? It feels like it's not necessarily the point anymore. And again, whether that's a good or bad thing, it doesn't matter. It's just I don't feel like there's as much of a push to utilize dragons in the current moment. I feel like that was definitely an older remnant of really wanting to, and again, maybe that was because again before they were trying to find a way to integrate dragons, so there was a lot more intrigue, and now they've integrated it so much that it's like, maybe I'll get to it next time.
Yeah, I feel like, especially with how D&D has evolved and how popular it's become, it's like when you don't really need to look for a reason anymore. If someone's gonna grab it, they're gonna grab it because dragons. It's like, oh my gosh, I really want to fight a dragon or whatever. Like you're gonna go seeking it out instead of needing to find a reason to seek it out. But honestly, I still really feel like there's an appreciation that you don't necessarily get when you have that genuine reason behind the thing. You are actually like feeling like you're getting into a thing rather than just it's there just because it's there. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So I again I get why, but at the same time, I think there's definitely something to be said for lore, reasons why. You know,
Mhm.
what was it, Raw without lore?
Yeah. Raw without lore, man. That's my biggest thing is raw without lore is difficult, and it doesn't necessarily make for a better game. You know what I mean?
Agreed.
And said awesome and dragons. The only dragon in a campaign I remember vividly is when we had to deal with Themberchod. Themberchod. That's not a name I'm familiar with. Dragons now in 5e feel a little underwhelming. Yeah, I mean, the more you had to make them approachable and usable, and I think that's also I want to say that the underwhelming part is probably a lot on how many types, like with all the different categories. It's you know, it's a big question of, do I just throw any old dragon at you of a certain power level, or do I throw a named dragon at you and make it part of the lore, right? I feel like that also makes it difficult when I feel like 5th edition has so much lore that it's almost like it's hard to want to create a brand new, you know, not nameless dragon, but you know, a new nemesis dragon when you have all of these other names to pick from. But then if you pick from a regular name, you don't want it to die because it's important, right? So yeah. Oh, the chunkiest red dragon. I know what you're talking about. Yeah, that's from the D&D movie, right? Or I know they used it in the D&D movie. I don't know if that's where it was originated from, but yeah, the chunky red dragon. But yeah, you know,
Red dragon.
it's so funny. Dragons are so, I don't want to say so integral. It's assumed that dragons are so integral to D&D. It's in the name itself, and yet it's fascinating to realize it took them 3 iterations to really give us anything truly miraculous about a dragon, and then it still took them 3 more iterations to basically almost go a 180, right? Like before it was just some creature, high risk, high reward. Then it became this integrated societal creature that eventually became part of the entire pantheon, the entire creation of D&D. And now it's just, yeah, there's a bunch of important dragons out there. Just deal with it. You know what I mean? Like it's almost like they lost touch with why it was so fun for, you know, watching 1st, 2nd, and 3rd edition figure out dragons. And yet now it's almost like there's just too much, right? It's almost like there's too much and no novelty. So is there a fix for that? I don't know.
Honestly, I think that's, like you described, lightweight 5th edition in a nutshell right there. That's the direction I feel like a lot of D&D has gone. And don't get me wrong, it's not all of it, but a large portion of it is that. It's just, eh, yeah, you could if you wanted to, but shrug emoji at the end of the day, you know?
Yeah.
So,
But that's interesting. No, I'm really happy we did this one. It wasn't nearly as expansive and you know, uh, like like massively changing as we've seen. You know, it's not like the Bard or the Druid where they just changed every edition until they figured it out. It's amazing to see that there were some things they just never dropped. You know what I mean? Like the age category, um, the the actual dynamic of the hierarchies. Those things really never changed. They just got more detailed. It seems like the only thing that really changed was the usage. You know what I mean? We got so many more types, so many more, intricate understandings of the society. But at the end of the day, the only thing that really changed is the actual gameplay usage of dragons. Outside of that, I feel like all they ever did was improve. You know what I mean? I don't really feel like any edition ruined dragons. I feel like it just got to a point to where we stopped building them for usage and we started building them for storytelling. And that's not a bad thing, but it definitely felt like first, second, and third really nailed the usage of a dragon and how to put it into a campaign and make it a something worth going after. And now it feels like dragons are primarily just to talk about. Maybe I'm wrong. Let me know in the comments.
let me know in the comments.
Anyway, I think that's going to be us for tonight. That's a good 3-hour stream. I'm really happy with that. I hope you guys really enjoyed the history of dragons here on D&D Discussions. Phenomenal topic, and yeah, we actually got through pretty much everything. So next week,
Yeah.
if as long as I have time,
I think we did
we are going to follow this topic up next week with the history of the Dragonborn. It's not going to be a very big history because apparently Dragonborn's only around since 4th edition, but I still want to dive deep into how that Dragonborn works. Maybe we'll dive into more of the 3rd edition dragon lineage and see what, you know, the seeds that were planted before we got a full Dragonborn. But yes, next week, meet us here next Friday for history of Dragonborn and more dragon related stuff, because that may not be a full topic. Maybe we'll get into those half dragons that we heard about in 3rd edition, and maybe we'll get into more dragon type stuff. But before we go, what can the folks expect on Monday?
Moon Day. All right, let's take a gander here. It looks like we have another race from Marty the Fearless.
Hey, Marty.
Marty, you're gonna have to help me with the phonetic pronunciation of this. All right, Ferris Lenhar. That's what I got.
Oh, this is the elephant. Oh, no, the hippo.
Ross Allenhar. Yes. Yeah. The hippo. Yes.
Hippo. Yes. Okay. This is the
doesn't have a
hippo
bunch
race.
of subclasses or subraces.
No, but that's
yeah.
still fascinating. I am still so excited to see the hippo race. Okay, so if you guys like homebrew and you want to see us review homebrew, join us on Monday where we will be reviewing this hippo race. We basically just read it out as it's been submitted to us, give our critique and our balancing, and then we give it a compatibility score with whether or not I'd be able to use it in High Point. So if that sounds interesting, join us on Monday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for D&D Discussions Homebrew Review. Otherwise, we are here every Monday and Friday, 6 p.m. on Mondays, 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Fridays for things like history ofs. So we, like we did today, or we just dive into different topics. We do have the February community stream up and going. So if you guys do complete that challenge, we will add in a whole extra stream next month that you will vote on both topic and type. So if you are interested in that and you wanted to get some more information, you can join our Discord. Link is in chat. And if you missed anything and like this stream and you want to catch anything that you missed, or if you want to check out any of our other live streams, we do have a VODs channel on YouTube. Another link in chat to our link tree where you can find us on all of the socials, including our VODs channel where you can watch this and any of our live streams whenever you want. Other than that, I think that's going to be us for this today. We have no other updates. Again, we are looking for editors, new and upcoming editors that want to get some practice in with some real content, want to build a portfolio and aren't expecting much money. Send them our way. Hit us up if you are interested, because we do want to start developing more shorts and long form content. So I am looking for both short and long form editors who are interested in helping us out. So other than that, I hope you guys had a fantastic week. I hope you guys have a brilliant and amazing weekend ahead of you. We will be back on Monday if I don't do some game streams this weekend. So yeah, thank you guys again. Thank you, Hoylepa, from joining us. Marty, Soul, Hecate, Cosmic even joined us today. Thank you all so much for being here. It's been a pleasure, guys. Cheers. It didn't work. I didn't hear you. You didn't say anything. Don't think it's working. Oh well. He said deuces, my friends.
Your rollout didn't work.
But yours didn't. Now I'm finally hearing you. I wasn't able to hear you first. All right, y'all. Take it easy. We're out of here.
Rip. Deuces.